My name is Abigail Smith. I am 32 years old. Last Saturday night, I sat at the head table of my mother-in-law's 40th anniversary gala, wearing a navy dress she picked out for me, and I watched her life end. The string quartet was playing Vivaldi. A waiter in a crisp white jacket leaned down and whispered into my father-in-law's ear. I watched the blood drain from Richard's face. His platinum card had just declined for the catering bill. Then his corporate accounts declined. Then the federal tax freeze notification appeared on the manager's tablet. Diane, my mother-in-law, did not look at the manager. She looked directly at me. Her hands shook so hard her champagne spilled over the rim of her crystal flute. She knew I did it. What she did not know was that I was reclaiming a $2 million inheritance she stole from me a decade ago, a secret she buried inside the very walls of my home. Before I explain how I legally dismantled a local real estate empire in front of 200 of Iowa's wealthiest residents, welcome to Grape Echo Stories. If you have ever smiled politely while toxic in-laws insulted you at the dinner table, this story is for you. Please take a second to subscribe and drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from right now. I read every single one. Now let me take you back 6 weeks, back to the smell of burnt grease and scorched pine that started it all. I work as an agricultural insurance claims adjuster in Des Moines. My career involves standing in the ashes of collapsed grain silos, calculating exactly where the structural integrity gave way. I investigate ruins for a living. So when a grease fire gutted my own suburban kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, I did not cry on the front lawn. I stood on the sidewalk, documenting the fire department's response time. The crew killed the blaze in under 12 minutes. Standard procedure for an interior fire requires checking the surrounding wall cavities for smoldering embers. A young lieutenant in soot-stained gear carried a pry bar into the kitchen. He began pulling down the drywall directly behind where my oven used to sit. 10 minutes later, he walked out the front door, holding a heavy, wax-sealed envelope. The edges were charred brown. The paper smelled of thick smoke, but the center remained intact. He handed it to me. I ran my thumb over the stiff parchment. It had not slipped down a gap. It was intentionally forced behind a custom oak load-bearing beam. Richard is a local residential developer. He personally installed that specific beam during a kitchen remodel he generously called our wedding gift 5 years ago. Tires screeched against the wet asphalt. My husband Bradley threw his sedan into park and sprinted across the lawn. His tie hung loose. His chest heaved with ragged, shallow gasps. He did not pull me into an embrace. He did not ask if I inhaled smoke or if I suffered burns. His eyes darted right past me, locking onto the shattered front window and the torn drywall visible through the frame. He grabbed the fire chief by the sleeve. "Did your men pull any debris from that back wall?" he asked. His voice cracked with a high-pitched, frantic urgency. "Did you take anything out of the cavity?" He was not mourning the loss of our kitchen. He was mourning the breach of a vault. I stood 3 feet away watching my husband unravel. I slipped the scorched envelope deep into the pocket of my wool coat, letting the heavy fabric hide the edges. My house was a smoldering ruin, but the true structural collapse had nothing to do with the fire. The foundation of my marriage rested on a concealed crime, and my investigation had just begun. The heater blasted dry air against my face, but my hands remained ice cold. I sat behind the leather steering wheel of my sedan, parked 2 houses down from the smoldering remains of my property. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I watched Bradley. My husband was currently cornering a junior firefighter near the crushed rhododendron bushes. Bradley wiped sweat from his forehead despite the chilling October wind. He kept gesturing toward the exposed wooden framing of the kitchen. He was desperate to confirm the wall cavity was empty. His distraction provided my window. I reached into the deep pocket of my wool coat and withdrew the wax-sealed envelope. The outer edges crumbled slightly, shedding fine black soot onto my lap. I turned on the overhead dome light. The illumination cast a harsh yellow glow over the thick parchment. I slid my index finger under the remaining wax and broke the seal. Inside rested 2 folded pieces of heavy stock legal paper. I flattened them against the steering wheel. The primary document was a trust codicil. The letterhead bore the embossed insignia of a prominent wealth management bank located in downtown Des Moines. Below the bank logo was the name of the grantor, Beatrice Smith, my late grandmother. Beatrice was a woman who navigated the world with a cynical, pragmatic grace. She built a lucrative agricultural supply business in the 70s, outmaneuvering men who thought a widow could not read a balance sheet. She loved me, but she never coddled me. I scanned the dense legal paragraphs, bypassing the standard boilerplate language, until I found the disbursement clause. The text was clear and irrefutable. Beatrice had established a private trust intended to bypass the standard probate courts. The account held $2 million. The funds were designated solely for me upon my 22nd birthday. The stipulations explicitly forbade any spousal access or parental interference. I did not gasp. I did not shed a tear. When an insurance adjuster discovers a catastrophic structural failure, they do not weep over the concrete. They pull out a calculator and assess the damage. 10 years ago, I turned 22. For a decade, I woke up at dawn to drive to disaster sites, paying off my own college loans while $2 million sat in the dark. I turned to the second page. It was a certified postal delivery receipt. Legal documents of this magnitude require a physical signature to confirm custody. The postal stamp in the upper right corner was dated a decade ago, exactly 1 month before Beatrice passed away. I looked at the signature line resting at the bottom of the page. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It featured elegant, swooping cursive with a distinct, sharp loop on the capital D and a long, trailing tail on the N. Diane Lawson, my mother-in-law. Diane had intercepted the certified mail. She signed her own name to claim receipt of a highly confidential legal document meant for her daughter-in-law. A memory, sharp and uninvited, broke through the sterile quiet of my sedan. It was a Tuesday afternoon 10 years ago. I sat in a sterile hospice room smelling of harsh antiseptic and fading lavender perfume. Beatrice lay in the bed, her breathing shallow, but her eyes sharp. Bradley stood in the hallway outside her door, talking on his cell phone and checking his luxury watch. Beatrice reached out and gripped my wrist. Her fingers felt like brittle twigs, but her grip was iron. "He looks at you like a possession, Abby," she whispered. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping across a driveway. "Men like that do not protect you. They guard their investments." I was young and naive. I dismissed her words as the generational cynicism of a woman who had spent her life fighting off greedy executives. I defended Bradley. I told her he was a good man from a respectable family. Now, staring at a stolen $2 million inheritance illuminated by a dome light, I realized Beatrice was not being cynical. She was offering a clinical diagnosis. She recognized a predator standing in the hallway. Diane intercepted the cash. But reading the forged signature presented a new logistical puzzle. The certified receipt was 10 years old. The load-bearing beam the envelope was wedged behind was only 5 years old. The timeline revealed the true depth of the syndicate. 5 years ago, Bradley and I bought this house. The kitchen was dated. Richard stepped in, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. He offered to send his personal construction crew to remodel the entire space, free of charge. Diane hosted a dinner party specifically to announce this generous wedding gift to their country club friends. For 5 years, Diane reminded me to be grateful. Whenever I disagreed with her on a holiday menu or politely declined an invitation, she would sigh and mention the beautiful kitchen they built for us. She used that remodel as a psychological leash to demand my submission. They did not build me a kitchen. They built a tomb. Diane must have kept the physical document as a trophy, or perhaps as leverage against her own son. When they remodeled the house, Richard used his unrestricted access to the framing to permanently bury the evidence. They entombed my financial independence in the very walls of my home. They sat at my dining table, eating holiday meals just a few feet away from a $2 million secret, expecting me to thank them for the drywall. The passenger door handle clicked. I swiftly folded the papers and shoved them back into my coat pocket. I turned off the dome light just as the door swung open. Bradley dropped into the leather seat. He smelled of cold rain, stale sweat, and expensive cologne. He gripped the steering wheel, leaning forward to stare out the windshield. His chest was still heaving. "What did the fire chief say?" I asked. My voice sounded smooth, flat, and entirely unbothered. Bradley flinched at the sound of my voice. He turned to look at me, forcing his facial muscles to relax into a mask of concerned husbandry. He reached over and placed a cold, damp hand over mine. "They think it was an electrical short behind the oven," Bradley lied. His eyes darted to my coat pocket and then back to my face. He swallowed hard. "The chief said the internal studs are clear. We can probably salvage the framing. Are you okay, Abby? You look pale." I looked into the eyes of a man who treated my existence as a managed asset. He thought he was calming a hysterical wife. He had no idea he was sitting next to a forensic liquidator. "I am fine, Bradley," I said. "I just need to figure out our next steps. We have a lot of rebuilding to do." He exhaled a long, shaky breath, believing his secret was still secure in the ashes. He started the engine and put the car in drive. We drove away from the ruined house in silence. A sum of $2 million does not simply evaporate. It does not sit idle. Wealth requires maintenance. It buys luxury vehicles. It subsidizes failing businesses. And it creates a dense, undeniable paper trail. Cash always leaves a footprint. Diane and Richard thought they could lock my future behind an oak beam and walk away clean. They failed to realize that every bank requires a ledger. The letterhead on the trust document bore the specific branch location of the Wealth Management Bank in downtown Des Moines. That building was the origin point of the pipeline. Tomorrow morning, while Bradley met with his father to panic over the fire, I would visit that bank. I was going to find out exactly whose name was on the vault. The morning after the fire dawned gray and bitter. Bradley rolled out of the hotel bed before sunrise. He tied his necktie with jerky, uneven movements, claiming he needed to meet his father at the construction office to discuss debris removal. His eyes avoided the mirror. He grabbed his briefcase and fled the room. He was not going to talk about debris. He was rushing to contain a breach. I waited until his taillights disappeared down the wet street. Then I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, my armor. I drove downtown to the financial district of Des Moines. The Wealth Management Bank occupied the ground floor of a towering glass high-rise. Inside, the lobby smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. It was a space designed to intimidate the working class and comfort the elite. I walked past the velvet ropes and approached the reception desk, requesting an immediate audience with the branch manager. The manager was a man named Marcus Thorne. He wore a custom suit that cost more than my first car. He ushered me into a glass-walled office and offered a practiced, sympathetic smile. I did not return it. I placed my driver license and the scorched trust codicil directly onto his immaculate mahogany desk. I informed him I was the sole beneficiary of the Beatrice Smith Trust, and I required the complete disbursement ledger. Marcus picked up the charred paper. His eyes scanned the text. The rehearsed smile faltered, sliding off his face like wet paint. He set the document down and turned to his dual monitors. His fingers tapped a rapid sequence across the keyboard. The screen cast a pale blue glow over his sharp features. He stopped typing. He cleared his throat and steepled his fingers, resting his elbows on the desk. "I am sorry, Mrs. Smith," he said. His tone adopted a hollow, corporate regret. That particular trust was liquidated and the account permanently closed 9 years ago. I kept my posture rigid. "Who authorized the liquidation?" Marcus shifted in his ergonomic chair. The closure was executed under a durable power of attorney filed by a designated representative. A woman named Diane Lawson presented the legal authorization. The funds were transferred, and the file is sealed. I cannot provide you with the ledger due to strict privacy regulations regarding closed accounts. He leaned back, crossing his arms, expecting me to accept the dismissal. He saw a young woman grieving a house fire. He assumed I lacked the vocabulary to challenge a banking executive. I did not argue. I reached into my leather tote bag and retrieved my credentials. I slid my State Agricultural Insurance Commission badge across the smooth wood surface, stopping it right next to his gold monogrammed pen. I am a senior claims adjuster for the state of Iowa, I said. My voice was smooth and unyielding. We oversee commercial property insurance riders. When a liquid asset transfer of this magnitude bypasses probate using a secondary power of attorney, it triggers an automatic flag for underwriting fraud. Marcus stared at the badge, his arms uncrossed. Privacy laws protect legitimate clients. I continued holding his gaze. They do not protect fraudulent instruments. If you refuse to produce the secondary transfer logs right now, I will walk out of this office and file a formal state audit against this specific branch. My department will freeze every commercial property rider your bank currently underwrites, pending a federal inquiry into collusion. You will spend the next 6 months explaining to a tribunal why you shielded a forged document. The air in the office grew heavy. Marcus swallowed hard. His throat tightened above his silk collar. The threat of a state audit is a death sentence for a regional wealth manager. It brings federal regulators crawling through every localized transaction. He looked at the scorched envelope, then at my badge. The calculation in his mind was visible. He was weighing his loyalty to Diane Lawson against his own professional survival. Survival won. Marcus turned back to his keyboard. His hands carried a slight tremor. He bypassed the standard privacy filters and pulled up the archived wire transfers. He hit a command on his screen. A laser printer in the corner of the office hummed to life. He retrieved a single sheet of paper and slid it across the desk toward me. I picked up the routing sheet. It documented a single incoming wire transfer executed 9 years ago. $2 million moved from my grandmother's trust into an external holding company. The receiving entity was listed as Midwest Prairie Holdings. I memorized the routing number and the corporate tax identification code. I stood up, returning my badge to my tote bag. I did not thank him. I walked out of the glass office, leaving Marcus Thorne sweating in his expensive chair. Sitting in my car in the parking garage, I typed Midwest Prairie Holdings into my phone. A holding company is a ghost ship. It exists solely to own other assets while shielding the true beneficiaries from liability. But ghost ships still have to dock somewhere. I accessed the state business registry using my work portal. The search results populated a list of commercial properties owned by the shell company. My eyes locked onto the primary retail asset, a storefront located in the East Village, the most expensive high-end commercial district in Des Moines. I knew that address. It was a boutique called Maison Elegance. My sister-in-law Jessica operated Maison Elegance. Jessica is 30 years old. She possesses zero business acumen, zero retail experience, and a staggering sense of entitlement. She spends her days attending Pilates classes and hosting catered brunches. Her boutique sells imported European fashion at astronomical markups. The store is perpetually empty. I have never seen a single customer walk out holding a shopping bag. Yet Jessica drives a brand new imported SUV and carries limited edition designer handbags she casually tosses onto patio furniture during family barbecues. The math of her lifestyle never aligned with reality. A retail storefront in the East Village commands $10,000 a month in rent alone. A failing boutique should have bankrupted her in 6 months. But her store remained open year after year, projecting an illusion of elite success. Staring at the glowing screen of my phone, the pieces snapped into a horrifying configuration. My $2 million inheritance was the lifeblood of Maison Elegance. Diane had siphoned the cash into Midwest Prairie Holdings and used the shell company to subsidize her daughter's delusions of grandeur. They were wearing my grandmother's legacy. They were displaying my financial independence in their storefront windows and parading it across the country club dining room. Rage is a useless emotion. It clouds judgment and breeds reckless mistakes. I pushed the anger down, burying it under cold, hard logic. I prepared to audit her storefront. I envisioned walking into the boutique, demanding to see her inventory ledgers, and exposing her as the mastermind behind the theft. Jessica seemed like the perfect villain, vain, greedy, and eager to liquidate my future to fund her vanity. But as I started the car engine, my professional instincts kicked in. I paused my hand hovering over the gear shift. In the world of financial fraud, the loudest spender is rarely the architect. A woman who cannot balance a checkbook does not invent a sophisticated corporate shell company. Jessica was too flashy, too arrogant, and far too careless to orchestrate a 10-year cover-up. She was not the mastermind. She was the diversionary bait. If Jessica was spending the money, someone else was managing the vault. Someone who understood real estate law, corporate tax codes, and property management. Someone who knew exactly how to hide assets in plain sight. I needed to visit Maison Elegance, not to confront my sister-in-law, but to examine the structural foundation of her storefront. If Midwest Prairie Holdings owned the retail space, they likely owned other properties. I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the parking garage, heading toward the East Village. I had to look past the expensive dresses and locate the true landlord pulling the strings. Because if the syndicate owned the boutique, I needed to know what else they held the deed to. The East Village district of Des Moines operates on the currency of visual wealth. Brick sidewalks lined with imported maple trees lead to storefronts displaying minimalist art and exorbitant price tags. I parked my sedan 2 blocks away and walked toward Maison Elegance. The boutique featured floor-to-ceiling glass windows, showcasing 3 featureless mannequins draped in pale silk. The gold lettering on the awning gleamed in the overcast afternoon light. I pushed the heavy glass door open. A brass bell chimed, signaling my arrival. The interior smelled of expensive white tea and cedar. Racks of clothing were spaced far apart, emphasizing exclusivity over inventory. At the center of the showroom sat a curved velvet sofa. My mother-in-law, Diane, reclined against the cushions, holding a tall glass of sparkling water, garnished with a lime wedge. Jessica, my sister-in-law, stood near the register, berating a young sales associate about the placement of a scarf display. Jessica wore a tailored cashmere sweater and heavy gold bracelets that clinked against the glass counter. She paused mid-sentence when she saw me. "Abigail," she called out. Her voice carried a forced theatrical warmth. "What a surprise! I heard about the awful fire. You must be completely exhausted." Diane did not stand up. She offered a slow, measured smile, taking a sip of her water. "We were just discussing the gala this weekend, Abigail. You need something spectacular to wear, something that shows resilience." I played my role. I offered a weary, grateful smile and stepped deeper into the showroom. "I am looking for a dress," I said, keeping my tone compliant and submissive. "Bradley wants me to look presentable for the anniversary dinner." Jessica clapped her hands together, rings flashing. She gestured for the associate to pull several options from the back room. While Jessica fluttered around the store curating choices, I walked over to a rack of evening gowns. I pulled a simple navy sheath dress from the hanger and checked the discreet tag hidden in the lining. $4,200, a sum roughly equivalent to a month of my salary at the insurance firm. I let out a soft, calculated sigh and replaced the hanger. "It is beautiful," I murmured, loud enough for Diane to hear. "But I think it is a bit out of my budget right now, with the deductible for the house fire." Diane set her water glass on a low marble table. She crossed her legs, smoothing the fabric of her skirt. The maternal warmth vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating edge she reserved for negotiations. "You really should let us treat you, Abigail," she said. Her voice was smooth, but it carried the weight of a royal decree. "After all, we bought you that beautiful house. We are always stepping in to help. It is such a shame you are always so ungrateful for what this family provides." That word, ungrateful. It was her favorite psychological leash. She used it to corral any independent thought, to silence any question about her authority. For 10 years, she trained me to lower my head and apologize whenever she deployed it. She expected me to shrink into myself, to feel the crushing weight of my working-class background pressing against her high society benevolence. I turned to face her. I smiled, my expression carefully arranged into a mask of eager compliance. "You are right, Diane. I am sorry. I appreciate everything you and Richard have done for us. I truly do." She nodded, satisfied she had restored the hierarchy. She signaled Jessica to ring up the navy dress on the boutique account. While Jessica processed the transaction, I kept my smile fixed, but my mind was a vast, silent processing center. My morning at the library, accessing the state business registry, had yielded a secondary document. A document I reviewed just before driving to the boutique. Midwest Prairie Holdings did not just own the commercial lease for Maison Elegance. The LLC held multiple property deeds across the county. I had cross-referenced the parcel identification numbers against the county assessor database. One specific residential parcel matched the exact dimensions, square footage, and lot location of a house in the suburbs. My house. The house Diane and Richard claimed they purchased as a wedding gift. The house Bradley and I lived in. The house currently standing as a gutted ruin. The mortgage was never in our names. Bradley claimed we were paying a private land contract directly to his father to avoid high bank interest rates. Every month, I transferred half my paycheck into a joint account. Bradley wrote a check and handed it to Richard. For 5 years, I diligently paid property taxes and maintenance fees, believing I was building equity in my own home. I was not an ungrateful homeowner. I was an unwitting tenant. I was paying rent to a shell company funded entirely by my own stolen inheritance. Diane was literally charging me to live inside my own vault. She sat on a velvet sofa calling me ungrateful while wearing clothes subsidized by my grandmother's legacy, while I worked 60-hour weeks to pay her rent. The sheer audacity of the architecture was staggering. They had constructed a closed-loop financial system. They stole the principal capital, parked it in a corporate shell, bought a house with the cash, moved me into the house, and then forced me to pay them a monthly dividend for the privilege of being their victim. Jessica handed me a sleek shopping bag containing the navy dress. I took it, gripping the rope handles. "Thank you so much," I said, my voice soft and deferential. "I will wear it Saturday." I walked out of the boutique, leaving them to their sparkling water and false superiority. The Iowa wind hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, cooling my skin. The rage was building, a slow, steady pressure, contained behind a dam of cold calculation. I now understood the full scope of their empire. I saw the blueprint of their fraud. But blueprints are just paper. To execute a demolition, you need leverage. You need a structural flaw to exploit. I reached my car and unlocked the door. Just as I slid into the driver's seat, my phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out, checking the screen. It was a text message from Linda, my retired neighbor who lived directly across the street from my ruined house. Linda functioned as an unofficial neighborhood watch. Her text was brief and urgent. "Abby, did you schedule repairs today? A white panel van just pulled into your driveway. A guy with a sledgehammer just walked through your back door." My pulse spiked. The fire inspector had cleared the site, but the insurance adjuster, my colleague from the firm, was not scheduled to arrive until tomorrow to officially appraise the structural damage. No legitimate contractor should be on the premises. I started the engine, the tires gripping the asphalt as I pulled away from the curb. I drove toward the suburbs, navigating the midday traffic with sharp, precise maneuvers. The syndicate realized they had a loose end. Richard knew the wall cavity was exposed. He knew the envelope was missing. He could not risk an official insurance investigator cataloging the remaining debris and documenting the specific hollowed-out space behind the custom beam. The cover-up was active. The architect was deploying a cleaner. If Richard Contractor destroyed the kitchen framing completely, the physical origin point of the crime would be erased. The narrative would shift from a concealed document to a simple grease fire. I pressed the accelerator harder, gripping the steering wheel. Diane thought she won the afternoon by forcing me to accept a dress. She did not realize I was racing back to the crime scene to catch her husband's operative red-handed. The financial audit was solidifying, but I needed physical proof of their desperation. I needed to document the cover-up in real time. I parked my sedan 2 streets over from my ruined house. I chose a spot shaded by a row of mature oak trees obscuring my vehicle from the main road. The afternoon sky hung low and gray, threatening rain. I walked the remaining distance, utilizing the paved alleyways running behind the suburban lots. My heels made no sound on the damp concrete. As I approached my backyard, I spotted the vehicle Linda mentioned. A white panel van sat idling in my driveway. It carried no commercial branding, no company logo, no phone number, no state license plate on the front bumper. It was a ghost van, deployed for a ghost job. The back door leading into my kitchen stood ajar. The heavy scent of wet charcoal and ruined drywall spilled out into the cold yard. Underneath the smell of the fire, a rhythmic structural pounding echoed from the interior, metal striking wood. The sound vibrated through the floorboards. I stepped onto the back porch. I did not announce my presence. I slipped through the doorway and stood in the shadowed threshold of the mudroom, observing the scene. A man wearing a faded gray hooded sweatshirt and scuffed work boots stood in the center of the gutted kitchen. He wore no safety goggles and carried no official inspection clipboard. He gripped a heavy fiberglass sledgehammer with both hands. He was not inspecting the fire damage. He was ignoring the charred framing entirely. Instead, he aimed his swings at the intact section of drywall located just 2 feet left of where the fire lieutenant had extracted the hidden envelope. He swung the heavy steel head. The drywall crumbled upon impact, exposing the wooden studs in the vertical plumbing stack routing water to the upper floor bathrooms. He adjusted his stance, planting his boots in the ash, and swung again. This time, he targeted the copper pipes. The metal groaned under the force of the blow. A sharp hiss filled the room, followed instantly by a pressurized eruption of brown water. A torrent sprayed outward, drenching the man and flooding the kitchen floor. The water cascaded down the exposed studs, pooling into the hollow cavity of the lower wall structure. It soaked into the gypsum, turning the surrounding dust into a thick, dark paste. The strategy was brutally effective. Richard had ordered the destruction of the crime scene. He knew the envelope was missing from its original hiding place. He could not risk a secondary insurance sweep uncovering any stray fragments of paper or identifying the precise dimensions of the hollowed-out vault. By rupturing a main water line, his operative transformed the entire structural cavity into an unreadable swamp of mud and pulp. Any remaining evidence would disintegrate. I did not yell. I did not demand he drop the hammer. Confrontation yields nothing but defensive lies. I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved my smartphone. I opened the camera application, disabling the flash and the shutter sound. I framed the shot. I captured the contractor in profile, his face clearly visible. I captured the sledgehammer mid-swing. I captured the severed copper pipe actively flooding the exact location of my stolen inheritance. I tapped the screen, taking 3 high-resolution photographs in rapid succession. The contractor lowered the hammer, wiping dirty water from his eyes. He turned his head toward the mudroom and froze. He saw me standing in the shadows, my phone aimed directly at his chest. His grip slipped on the wet fiberglass handle. The heavy tool hit the flooded floorboards with a dull splash. He took a step backward, his eyes wide and shifting, searching for an escape route. "I did not authorize any plumbing work today," I said. My voice was calm and even, cutting through the sound of the rushing water. The man swallowed hard. He wiped his hands on his denim jeans, leaving dark streaks of soot across the fabric. "Mr. Lawson sent me," he stammered. His voice carried a nervous tremor. "He told me to secure the pipes before the freeze comes tonight. I think I slipped." I looked at the shattered drywall and the intentionally severed copper line. I offered him a polite, understanding smile, the kind of smile you give a child telling a transparent lie. "I appreciate your diligence," I replied. "Thank you for your time. You should probably shut off the main exterior valve before you leave. The city monitors residential water usage closely." I turned around and walked out the back door. I did not look over my shoulder. I returned to the alleyway, my pulse steady, my breathing controlled. The encounter provided the exact physical leverage I required. Their panic confirmed their profound legal vulnerability. A legitimate property developer does not send an unmarked van to smash open pipes in a condemned building. They were covering their tracks. I reached my car and locked the doors. I immediately uploaded the 3 photographs to my encrypted cloud server, ensuring the files were shielded from any potential device tampering. The visual evidence was secure. But photographs only document the action. To execute a federal trap, I needed to prove premeditation. I needed the architect issuing the commands. I needed to hear Richard Lawson giving the order. I started the engine and drove toward the downtown hotel where Bradley and I had rented a temporary suite. The rain began to fall in heavy sheets, blurring the windshield. My mind sifted through the layout of the ruined house, searching for a vulnerability in the syndicate network. 5 years ago, when we moved into the property, Richard insisted on upgrading our technology. He brought in a specialized crew to install a premium smart home security system. He claimed the neighborhood was transitioning, and he wanted his son and daughter-in-law to feel safe. The system was comprehensive. Motion-activated cameras monitored the front porch and the backyard. Smart thermostats regulated the temperature. Digital panels mounted in the living room and kitchen controlled the lighting and the locks. At the time, I felt a vague, persistent discomfort. The house always felt strangely observant. Now, viewing the system through the lens of a forensic investigator, the purpose of the technology was obvious. It was a panopticon, a Trojan horse designed to monitor his investment and ensure his tenants remained compliant. Richard paid the monthly subscription fee. He held the primary account ownership. He had ears inside my living room. But a surveillance tool works in both directions if you possess the right digital keys. I arrived at the hotel and took the elevator to our floor. The suite was empty. Bradley was still out, pretending to manage the crisis with his father. I sat at the small writing desk near the window and opened my laptop. I connected to the secure network utilizing a virtual private tunnel. As an insurance claims adjuster dealing in corporate liability, I possess advanced credentials for accessing property management databases and evaluating network security protocols. I pulled up the commercial website for the smart home provider Richard utilized. The consumer-facing application only allows users to view live video feeds and adjust the heating schedule. That dashboard was useless to me. I needed the administrative back end. I needed the server storage where the data packets were archived. I ran a diagnostic trace on the IP address assigned to our home hub. The trace led me to a cloud server login portal designed for installation technicians. This was the back door. People who inherit wealth rarely respect the technical details of their purchases. Richard viewed technology as a blunt instrument. He hired expensive contractors, but he never bothered to learn the underlying mechanics. When the technicians installed the system, they likely generated a default alphanumeric administrative password based on his corporate tax identification number or his primary business phone line. I typed his company phone number into the password field. The screen flashed red. Access denied. I tried his birth date paired with his last name. Access denied. I paused, staring at the blinking cursor. A narcissist anchors everything to their own legacy. I typed the founding year of his real estate firm, followed by the word Lawson. The screen turned white. A loading bar appeared. 3 seconds later, the administrative dashboard populated on my screen. I bypassed the video archives. The fire destroyed the camera lenses days ago. I scrolled down the sidebar and clicked on a directory labeled Environmental Sensors. Smart home panels often contain integrated microphones designed to respond to voice commands. Most consumers never realize these microphones continuously record ambient noise, uploading short audio packets to the cloud to improve speech recognition algorithms. If the primary account holder manually adjusts the privacy settings, they can force the system to archive these ambient recordings permanently. Richard had adjusted the settings. The directory contained hundreds of compressed audio files. They were meticulously sorted by date and timestamp. He had been listening to our private conversations for half a decade. I scrolled past the files from the current week. I needed historical context. I needed to find the specific moment the extortion dynamic shifted. I scrolled back through the archive, jumping backward in 6-month intervals. I selected a file dated 4 years ago. The timestamp indicated the recording occurred at 2 a.m. on a Thursday. I cross-referenced my own digital calendar on my phone. On that specific date 4 years ago, I was attending an out-of-state agricultural seminar in Nebraska. I was not in the house. I plugged my headphones into the laptop. I pressed play on the audio file. The digital static hissed for a brief second before the room acoustics crystallized. The ambient sound matched the dimensions of my living room. I heard the distinct clink of ice cubes hitting the side of a heavy crystal glass. Someone was pouring a drink. I leaned closer to the screen, expecting to hear Richard discussing the stolen trust fund with Diane. I expected to hear the architect outlining his grand design to his wife. A voice spoke cutting through the quiet background noise of the house. The voice did not belong to Richard Lawson. The voice did not belong to Diane. The person speaking into the dark living room, the person discussing the mechanics of a hidden vault and a stolen legacy, was the man I shared a bed with. I sat frozen in the hotel chair, listening to my husband. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, blocking out the steady rhythm of the rain hitting the hotel window. The digital static of the archived audio file hissed before settling into the clear acoustics of my own living room. The timestamp glowing on my laptop screen confirmed the date. I was in Nebraska, attending a crop yield seminar 4 years ago. The house was supposed to be empty. Footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor. Heavy, deliberate strides. Someone walked into the room and stopped. The clink of ice hitting glass followed. The unmistakable sound of a premium scotch being poured. Then a voice spoke. It was Bradley. He was not using the soft, placating tone he reserved for his mother, or the bumbling, apologetic cadence he used whenever he forgot a grocery list. His voice was cold, steady, and predatory. It lacked any trace of the anxious husband who had sprinted across my lawn earlier that day. "You took your time getting here," Bradley said. The ice rattled in his glass. A second set of footsteps entered the audio frame, slower, more burdened. Richard Lawson sighed. The sound carried the weight of a patriarch, exhausted by his own offspring. "I had to wait for your mother to fall asleep," Richard replied. His tone dripped with weary disgust. "You said this was an emergency. It is 2 a.m. What have you done this time?" The dynamic between father and son, stripped of their country club polish, was raw and transactional. Bradley grew up in the shadow of Richard and his sprawling real estate empire. Lacking the work ethic to build his own legacy, Bradley developed a taste for high-stakes baccarat to simulate the thrill of achievement. He called his frequent trips to Nevada networking conferences. I believed him because I trusted my partner. The audio file laid his true habits bare. "I have a marker," Richard Bradley said. His voice remained unnervingly calm. "It came due on Tuesday. The handlers flew into Des Moines this morning. They are staying at the Marriott downtown. They do not send collection letters. They send people who break fingers." "How much?" Richard asked. $150,000. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the recording. I could hear Richard breathing, his lungs working to process the sheer scale of his son and his reckless vice. "I will not pay it," Richard hissed. The words snapped like a whip. "I am done subsidizing your failures. You are a grown man. Let them break your fingers. It might teach you how to manage a budget. I am cutting you off." Bradley did not panic. He let out a low, dark chuckle that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You are not cutting me off, Dad," Bradley countered. "You are going to authorize a wire transfer by noon tomorrow. Because if you refuse, I am going to make a phone call to the State Fraud Division. I am going to tell them exactly what Mom forged 10 years ago." The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The air grew thick. "You do not have the original document," Richard growled. "Your mother told me she shredded it the day after the trust cleared." "Mom lies to you," Bradley stated, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "She kept the certified receipt in her desk drawer, a little trophy of her own brilliance. I found it when I was looking for a loan application 3 years ago. I took it. You stole it from your own mother." "I secured leverage," Bradley corrected. "Where is it?" Richard demanded. The sound of a heavy chair scraping against the floorboards indicated Richard taking a step toward his son. "Do not try to intimidate me, Dad. It will not work. You want to know where it is? Look around. During the kitchen remodel, before your crew hung the final drywall panels, I slipped the envelope into a gap behind the new oak beam. I wedged it tight. It is sealed in the framing. Right in the center of the house you bought us." The revelation hit my chest like physical, blunt force. My breathing stopped. My lungs refused to expand. Richard and Diane did not hide the envelope. My husband did. Bradley discovered his mother committed a federal crime. He discovered she intercepted a life-altering sum of money meant for his wife. He possessed the physical evidence. Instead of telling me the truth, instead of protecting the woman he swore vows to, he treated the forgery as a financial asset. He turned my stolen legacy into his own personal casino chip. He buried my inheritance in the walls and sat down to eat dinner with me every single night. The recording continued playing, the truth unraveling the very fabric of my reality. "Pay the marker," Dad Bradley commanded, "or I hand Abby the drywall saw myself, and Mom goes to federal prison for wire fraud. Your entire commercial portfolio will freeze pending the investigation. You will lose everything. $150,000 is a bargain to keep your empire intact." I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. My fingertips turned white against the edge of the keyboard. Every romantic weekend, every shared cup of coffee, every tender moment of our marriage replayed in my mind, shifting into a grotesque new context. Bradley did not love me. I was his hostage. My presence in his life guaranteed his limitless line of credit. Richard exhaled a long, defeated breath, the sound of a man recognizing a checkmate. "I will order the wire transfer in the morning," Richard said, his voice hollow and defeated. "But understand this, Bradley. Keeping your wife compliant is the rent you pay for this bailout. You keep her happy. You keep her blind. If she ever starts asking questions about her grandmother or looking at property records, I will tear this house down to the studs myself and bury you in the rubble." "I guarantee it," Bradley replied smoothly. "Abby trusts me. She never questions the budget." The recording clicked off. The file ended, leaving me in the silent hotel room. A normal spouse facing this level of betrayal throws the laptop against the wall. A betrayed wife screams, cries, and packs a suitcase to file divorce papers. She demands answers and seeks closure. I am a forensic claims adjuster. I do not seek closure. I seek restitution. I balance ledgers. Screaming at Bradley would only alert the syndicate that their perimeter was breached. Confrontation requires emotion, and emotion is a vulnerability. I saved the audio file to my encrypted cloud server, deleting all traces of my access from the smart home interface. I closed the laptop, placing it carefully into my leather tote bag. My marriage was an extortion racket. Bradley was not a victim of his wealthy parents. He was an active parasite holding my stolen future hostage to fund his failures. He monetized my existence. My heart rate slowed, reaching a steady, rhythmic calm. The shock evaporated, replaced by a cold, localized focus. I stood up and walked to the hotel bathroom mirror. I studied my reflection. The woman staring back was no longer a dutiful daughter-in-law or a trusting wife. She was the architect of an impending financial apocalypse. If Bradley was extorting Richard and Richard was funding the shell company, I needed to map the rest of the network before I initiated the collapse. The syndicate relied on a delicate balance of hidden assets. I had identified the source of the funds and the leverage holding the secret in place. But one piece of the puzzle remained unchecked. My sister-in-law, Jessica. Midwest Prairie Holdings subsidized her empty fashion boutique. Diane used Jessica to flaunt the stolen wealth. But if Bradley was a calculating parasite, what exactly was Jessica? Was she a silent partner in the extortion, or simply a convenient dumping ground for the laundered cash? To execute a flawless trap, you must evaluate the actual standing of every operative on the board. I needed to know if Jessica possessed the intelligence to counter my moves, or if she was nothing more than a decoy. I walked back into the hotel bedroom, retrieving my phone. I needed to bypass her high society facade and hack directly into her personal credit profiles. The lock on the hotel room door clicked. The heavy brass handle turned. Bradley walked into the suite, shaking rain from his coat. He looked exhausted, playing the role of a stressed homeowner perfectly. He offered me a weary, affectionate smile. "Hey, Abby," he murmured, walking toward me with open arms. "It is raining hard out there. I missed you." I looked at the man who buried my future behind an oak beam. I stepped forward and let him wrap his arms around my shoulders. I rested my chin against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I missed you too, Bradley," I said. My voice was soft, steady, and lethal. He kissed the top of my head, believing his vault was secure. He had no idea his wife had just become a liquidator. I pulled away, offering a practiced, compliant smile. Tomorrow, I would dismantle his sister. Today, I would simply let him sleep. The rhythmic sound of Bradley breathing filled the dark hotel suite. He slept the deep, untroubled sleep of a man who believed his lies were secure. I sat cross-legged on the floor of the bathroom, the door closed and a thick towel shoved against the bottom crack to block the light. The glow from my laptop screen illuminated the white subway tiles. Armed with the audio confession, my entire understanding of the syndicate shifted. I previously viewed my sister-in-law, Jessica, as a potential mastermind orchestrating the laundering of my stolen inheritance through her luxury storefront. She paraded around Des Moines carrying imported handbags and driving a pristine European SUV. She projected the image of a ruthless, high-society entrepreneur. I needed to verify her operational standing. As an insurance claims investigator evaluating commercial fraud, I maintain authorized access to comprehensive background check portals and Tier 1 credit bureaus. I opened a secure browser tab and typed Jessica Lawson into the search parameters. I bypassed her public social media profiles and accessed her private financial history. The digital records loaded, displaying an intricate web of personal debt. My supposed mastermind was drowning. The data revealed a staggering reality. Jessica possessed 0 retail equity. She carried 5 maxed-out credit cards bearing punishing interest rates. Her pristine European SUV was leased, and the profile showed 3 consecutive late payment warnings threatening imminent repossession. She maintained a revolving balance on high-yield personal loans just to cover her weekly Pilates memberships and catered brunch tabs. Jessica was broke. She was a financial illusion held together by predatory lending and sheer vanity. Staring at the red deficit markers on my screen, the true architecture of Maison Elegance snapped into focus. A legitimate business owner panics when their storefront remains empty. They liquidate inventory and cut losses. Jessica never panicked because the boutique was never designed to turn a profit. Richard engineered the storefront as a designated tax sinkhole. When a property developer illegally injects $2 million of stolen capital into his portfolio, the sudden influx generates a punitive capital gains liability. To offset those taxes, Richard needed a business that consistently bled cash. He set up Midwest Prairie Holdings, placed Jessica at the register, and let her play dress-up while the corporation absorbed the astronomical retail rent as a strategic operating loss. Jessica was not laundering my cash. She lacked the basic financial literacy to balance a checkbook. She was a clueless, golden pawn utilized by her father to create a legitimate-looking paper trail. The boutique was merely a write-off. Closing her credit profile, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Knowing Jessica was toothless narrowed my target list. The true enemies were the men who engineered the extortion and the mother who forged the delivery signature. I did not have to worry about Jessica outsmarting me. She would simply collapse the moment her father lost his checkbook. My focus shifted entirely to the architect, Richard Lawson. If Richard used my stolen trust to inflate his commercial real estate empire, I needed to document the structural ties. I needed to see exactly how intertwined his legitimate assets were with the stolen cash. The opportunity presented itself 2 days later during Sunday dinner at the Lawson estate. The dining room table was set with heavy sterling silver flatware and crystal wine glasses. A roast rested on a porcelain platter. The environment was designed to project an imposing, timeless wealth. Bradley sat to my left, aggressively cutting his meat, while Richard held court at the head of the table, boasting about a new commercial zoning permit he recently secured. Diane sat opposite me, surveying her family with a predatory satisfaction. I played my role. I wore a modest beige sweater and offered polite nods. When the men retired to the adjacent living room to watch a football game, and Diane stepped into the kitchen to instruct her housekeeper on the dessert course, I remained at the dining table. I opened my digital tablet, resting it flat against the mahogany surface. I connected to my secure virtual private network and accessed the county tax assessor database. Using the registration codes I extracted from the bank earlier that week, I searched for every commercial property linked to Richard and his holding companies. The download bar crawled across my screen, pulling in municipal tax filings and corporate loan agreements. The list was extensive. Richard owned 3 strip malls, a block of luxury downtown apartments, and a sprawling suburban storage facility. But the most crucial detail lived in the margin notes of his loan origination documents. To secure favorable interest rates for these acquisitions, Richard leveraged his entire portfolio against a series of high-yield commercial loans. The empire was highly leveraged. It required a constant, steady flow of liquid cash to satisfy the monthly debt service. If a single structural pillar failed, the banks would issue a margin call, and the entire deck of cards would collapse. I captured the parcel identification numbers and downloaded the collateral agreements, saving the PDF files directly to my encrypted drive. I slipped the tablet back into my purse, just as Diane carried a silver tray of pastries into the dining room. I folded my hands in my lap, offering her a serene smile. She set the tray down, but her eyes lingered on my face. She did not return the smile. A narcissist operates like a highly calibrated radar system, constantly scanning their environment for shifts in power dynamics. For 10 years, I functioned as a reliable source of psychological supply for Diane. I routinely apologized for minor infractions. I sought her approval on my clothing choices. I reacted with nervous compliance whenever she deployed a passive-aggressive insult. Tonight, I offered nothing. When Diane casually mentioned that my ruined house was an eyesore to the neighborhood and suggested I was handling the insurance claim too slowly, I did not defend myself. I did not flush with embarrassment or try to explain the logistical delays of a fire investigation. "You are entirely right, Diane," I replied, my voice smooth and devoid of friction. "We really need to manage the exterior aesthetics better. I appreciate your guidance." The silence that followed was thick and unnatural. Diane stared at me. Her pupils dilated slightly. The spoon in her hand hovered motionless over a pastry. She expected resistance. She expected the familiar, satisfying dance of predator and prey. By offering her zero emotional friction, I denied her the control she craved. A victim who stops fighting the cage is a victim who has found the key. My sudden, quiet compliance triggered alarms deep within her psychological architecture. She could not identify the specific threat, but her instincts recognized a fundamental shift in my programming. I was no longer seeking her approval. I was observing her. Diane set the spoon down. Her expression smoothed into a mask of chilling maternal concern. "You know, Abigail," she began, her voice adopting a sickly sweet cadence that made the air in the room feel heavy. "You have been through a tremendous amount of trauma this week. Losing a home to a fire is a devastating shock. I worry the stress is taking a toll on your mind. You seem so distant, so detached from reality." I met her gaze. "I am managing perfectly well, Diane. There is a lot to process." She shook her head, feigning deep sorrow. "No, sweetheart. You are internalizing the trauma. It is not healthy." I was talking to Richard this morning, and we both agreed you need professional support. We cannot have you breaking down while Bradley is up for his promotion. She was laying the groundwork. If she could not control me through intimidation and guilt, she would neutralize me by attacking my credibility. "I think we need a girls' day," Diane announced, clapping her hands together with forced, bright enthusiasm. "Just the two of us. Tomorrow morning, I am taking you to the spa. We will get massages and step away from all this insurance paperwork. You need to relax your mind before it plays tricks on you." She framed it as a generous invitation, but her tone carried the undeniable weight of a subpoena. It was a preemptive strike. Diane sensed she was losing her psychological grip and decided to initiate a campaign to permanently discredit my sanity. She wanted to isolate me, draw me out of my routine, and observe me under a microscope. I looked at her manicured hands and the expensive jewelry glittering under the dining room chandelier. I knew the spa day was a trap. I knew she was maneuvering me into a hostile environment. But declining the invitation would only escalate her panic. To finalize the blueprint of their financial ruin, I needed to see exactly how far she was willing to go to protect her stolen wealth. "That sounds wonderful, Diane," I said, maintaining my flawless, serene facade. "A spa day is exactly what I need." She smiled, her eyes cold and calculating. She believed she was leading a naive lamb away from the flock. She had no idea she was escorting a forensic liquidator directly into the final phase of an audit. Tomorrow she would attempt to break my mind. I would simply press record. The drive from the hotel began under a canopy of gray clouds. Diane picked me up at 9 in the morning, driving a pristine pearl-white SUV that smelled of eucalyptus and expensive leather. She wore oversized sunglasses and gripped the steering wheel with tense, manicured fingers. For the first 20 minutes, she offered a steady stream of vapid commentary regarding the upcoming anniversary gala. She discussed the floral arrangements and the caterer with an intense, manufactured brightness. I watched the passing landscape through the tinted passenger window. We merged onto the interstate, heading west. The country club was located east of the city. I did not point out the geographical discrepancy. I let her drive. We exited the highway and navigated a series of winding suburban roads lined with identical corporate parks. Diane pulled into an empty parking lot bordering a low-slung beige brick building. There were no valet attendants. There was no awning. A discreet brass plaque mounted beside the glass double doors read, "Evans Behavioral Associates." Diane cut the engine. She dropped the keys into her designer handbag and turned to face me. The bright conversational facade vanished. Her features hardened into a mask of grim determination. "We are making a detour, Abigail," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "Richard and I have discussed your recent behavior at length. You are slipping. The fire shattered your nerves, and you need an expert to help you process the trauma before you do something regrettable." She opened her door and stepped onto the pavement. I remained in the passenger seat for a calculated 5 seconds. I assessed the perimeter. I was not walking into a day of relaxation. I was walking into a clinical ambush. If I refused to enter the building, Diane would call Bradley. They would frame my refusal as an erratic, combative episode. The most effective way to dismantle a trap is to step onto the spring and jam the mechanism from the inside. I exited the vehicle and followed her through the glass doors. The waiting room featured sterile gray carpet and generic watercolor prints of sailboats. A receptionist sitting behind a frosted glass partition waved us directly through to the back hallway without requesting any insurance paperwork. The consultation was prearranged and privately funded. Diane opened a heavy wooden door and ushered me into a dimly lit office. A man in his late 50s, wearing a tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses, sat behind a polished oak desk. Dr. Evans. He stood up, offering a warm, practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. He gestured toward a low, sinking leather sofa positioned opposite his desk. "Please, Abigail, have a seat," he murmured, his voice cultivated to sound endlessly patient. "Diane has shared her concerns with me. This is a safe space." I sat on the edge of the sofa, keeping my spine straight and my knees crossed. I did not sink into the cushions. Diane took the armchair to my right, folding her hands in her lap. Dr. Evans opened a leather-bound notebook and clicked a silver pen. "Let us start by discussing the fire, Abigail. Diane mentions you have exhibited severe emotional detachment since the incident. She says you wander around muttering about property records and financial conspiracies." Diane let out a soft, choked sob. She reached into her handbag and produced a monogrammed tissue, pressing it to the corner of her eye. "It breaks my heart, doctor," she whispered, her voice trembling with theatrical grief. "She is so paranoid. She treats Bradley with cold suspicion. We bought them a beautiful home, and now she seems obsessed with the idea that we are hiding things from her. The trauma has fractured her grasp on reality. She is building these wild delusions regarding our family finances." The sheer brilliance of the maneuver commanded a dark, clinical respect. Diane was weaponizing my actual investigation. By filtering my legitimate discoveries through the lens of psychiatric trauma, she was constructing a firewall. If I ever went to the authorities claiming my inheritance was stolen, Diane could produce a medical file documenting a severe paranoid episode regarding money. A licensed diagnosis of mental instability would instantly invalidate any fraud claims I presented in a federal court. A judge would view my evidence as the frantic scribblings of a traumatized woman. They were not just trying to silence me. They were attempting to legally institutionalize my identity to protect their ledger. I rested my left hand over my right wrist. I subtly pressed the digital crown on my smartwatch, activating the voice memo application. A faint haptic vibration pulsed against my skin, confirming the recording had commenced. Dr. Evans leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "Trauma often manifests as paranoia, Abigail. When we lose control of our physical environment, like a sudden house fire, the brain attempts to regain control by fabricating hidden threats. You are projecting your fear onto your loved ones. Do you often feel suspicious of the people trying to care for you?" The prompt was designed to elicit a defensive reaction. If I argued, I proved I was combative. If I accused Diane of theft, I proved I was delusional. I met his gaze, holding my expression perfectly neutral. "The house fire was certainly an unexpected disruption, Dr. Evans," I replied. My voice was smooth, measured, and devoid of inflection. "However, I am managing my daily tasks without issue. I continue to fulfill my professional duties at the insurance firm, and I am actively coordinating the rebuilding logistics." He frowned, his pen pausing over the notebook. He expected tears. He expected a frantic denial. "But are you experiencing intrusive thoughts regarding your in-laws?" He pressed, probing for a fracture. "Diane reports you have been unnervingly quiet. Isolation is a primary symptom of a psychological break. I process logistical challenges internally," I stated, offering a bland, polite smile. "I assure you my relationship with reality is firmly intact." Diane gripped the arms of her chair. The tissue in her hand crumpled into a tight ball. "She needs an intervention, doctor." She snapped her maternal facade, cracking slightly at the edges. "She is not sleeping. She sits in the dark on her computer. She is a danger to herself." Dr. Evans nodded solemnly, validating her fabricated panic. "Given the severity of the symptoms described and your clear state of denial, Abigail, I believe a proactive approach is necessary. We need to reset your baseline. I highly recommend a brief, voluntary stay at a restorative psychiatric facility. Just a few days of observation. In the interim, I can prescribe a mild sedative to help you manage these paranoid ideations." The trap snapped shut. They wanted me drugged and confined. A voluntary hold requires the signature of the patient or the spouse. If I appeared erratic, Bradley could sign the authorization on my behalf, overriding my consent. I did not raise my voice. I did not shift my posture. I utilized the precise bureaucratic language I employed every day in the corporate sector. "I appreciate your clinical assessment, Dr. Evans," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "However, my current health insurance policy dictates a mandatory primary care referral for any psychotropic prescriptions or inpatient authorizations. I am not comfortable bypassing my established medical provider. I will schedule a consultation with my personal physician to discuss your recommendations." Dr. Evans opened his mouth to argue, but my response offered no clinical foothold. I was rational, articulate, and compliant with standard medical procedure. I gave him nothing to diagnose. Diane lost her grip. Her pristine image shattered. She slammed her hand against the armrest, the sharp sound echoing in the quiet office. "You are not leaving this building, Abigail," she hissed. Her eyes widened, her breathing turning shallow and rapid. "You are sick. You are going to take the medication, and you are going to let us fix you." I looked at the woman who forged my grandmother's signature. I looked at the thief trying to lock me in a padded room to cover her tracks. I stood up, slowly smoothing the fabric of my skirt. I tapped my watch, stopping the recording, and securing the audio file to my cloud server. I possessed digital proof of Diane attempting to coerce a medical professional into a fraudulent diagnosis. It was extortion, caught on tape. "Thank you for your time, Dr. Evans," I said, turning toward the door. "This session has been incredibly illuminating." I grasped the brass handle and pulled the door open, stepping into the hallway. "Abigail," Diane shouted, scrambling out of her chair. Her heels clicked frantically against the floorboards as she chased me into the reception area. She grabbed my elbow, her nails digging into my sleeve. "You cannot just walk away," she spat, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You belong to this family. You will do what I say." I stopped. I turned my head and looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until she felt the sheer, sub-zero drop in the atmospheric pressure between us. Slowly, her fingers uncurled. She dropped her hand, taking a half step backward. Diane realized she had overplayed her hand. Her public outburst in the waiting room contradicted her weeping mother routine. The receptionist was staring at us. Diane needed to regain the narrative. She needed to assert dominance and pretend the ambush was merely a minor disagreement. She could not let me return to the hotel alone. "Fine," she said, her chest heaving as she forced her facial muscles back into a tight, strained smile. "If you refuse medical help, we will try a holistic approach. We are going to the country club spa. Right now. You are going to sit in a massage chair, and you are going to relax." I looked at her desperate, trembling form. She was demanding obedience, unaware that I had just captured the final piece of audio evidence required to seal her federal indictment. "Of course, Diane," I replied, my voice echoing with a dark, hidden satisfaction. "A spa day sounds perfect. Lead the way." We walked out to the SUV. She thought she was forcing me into submission. She did not know I was about to use her country club network to trigger a catastrophic margin call. The pearl-white SUV glided past the manicured hedges of the country club entrance. The wrought iron gates swung open, granting Diane access to her kingdom. She parked in a reserved spot near the grand limestone clubhouse. Her hands remained tight on the steering wheel, even after the engine clicked off. The failed ambush at the therapist office left a lingering, volatile energy in the vehicle. Diane needed to recalibrate. She needed an environment where her authority was absolute and unquestioned. "Come along, Abigail," she said, her voice clipped. She grabbed her designer handbag and marched toward the spa entrance. Inside, the air smelled of eucalyptus and expensive, damp stone. The receptionist greeted Diane by name, offering fawning deference. We were ushered into the private member lounge and handed heavy, plush, white robes. We changed in silence. Diane selected 2 leather massage chairs positioned near a trickling indoor waterfall for our manicures. I settled into the deep cushions, extending my hands to the waiting technician. The warm water in the soaking bowl eased the tension in my joints. Diane reclined in the chair beside me. She closed her eyes, attempting to project an image of serene control. But true narcissists cannot tolerate silence. They interpret quiet obedience as an opportunity to reinforce their dominance. Diane needed to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. She needed to assert her superiority to compensate for her earlier loss of composure. "You know, Abigail," she murmured, keeping her eyes closed while the technician filed her nails. "The reason Richard and I have been so successful, the reason we can afford to provide for Bradley and you, is because we understand discipline. Most people let money slip through their fingers. They are careless. They let outsiders dictate their terms." I kept my gaze fixed on my own hands, offering a polite, non-committal hum. "The secret to true wealth," she continued, her tone adopting a lecturing, arrogant cadence, "is absolute control over your assets. I manage every penny of this family portfolio. Richard handles the construction, but I oversee the ledgers. I consolidate our holdings. Nothing moves without my authorization. The dramatic irony was intoxicating. It was a potent, invisible chemical filling the space between our chairs. While she boasted about her meticulous bookkeeping and her bulletproof portfolio, my mind was rapidly reviewing the PDF documents I had extracted from the county tax assessor database the night before. I had spent hours analyzing the loan origination forms Richard filed for his recent commercial acquisitions. The documents revealed a fatal structural flaw in their empire. When a property developer seeks to acquire highly leveraged commercial real estate, banks require substantial collateral to secure favorable interest rates. Richard needed a massive liquid asset to back his loans. He utilized the $2 million sitting in Midwest Prairie Holdings. But the bank underwriters required the signature of a guarantor linked directly to the collateral funds. Because the stolen money originated from my grandmother trust, and the paper trail, albeit forged, still carried my identity, Richard and Diane could not simply claim the cash as their own without triggering a federal audit. They needed a bridge. To satisfy the bank requirements, Richard fraudulently listed my name as a secondary corporate guarantor on his massive commercial real estate loans. He forged my signature on the underwriting agreements, pledging my stolen trust as the collateral backbone for his entire empire. Diane believed she possessed absolute control. She sat in her plush robe, bragging about her financial brilliance, entirely oblivious to the fact that her husband's administrative shortcut had inadvertently handed me the legal authority to destroy them. By listing me as a guarantor, they granted me authorized executive access to the primary commercial loan portal. I was no longer just a victim or a compliant daughter-in-law. I was a legally recognized co-signer. I smiled at the technician applying a sheer pink polish to my nails. "You are incredibly organized, Diane," I said, my voice smooth and deferential. "It must take a brilliant mind to keep all those accounts balanced. I cannot imagine managing that level of leverage." Diane opened her eyes, offering a smug, satisfied smile. She basked in my apparent submission. She interpreted my compliment as a surrender. She believed the spa trip had successfully broken my rebellious streak and restored the natural order. "It is second nature to me," she replied, waving her freshly painted hand dismissively. "You just have to ensure every account is locked down tight. No loose ends." I admired my own nails blowing gently on the wet polish. "You are absolutely right, Diane. Control is everything." The technician finished her work and retreated, leaving us alone near the waterfall. Diane closed her eyes again, soaking in the manufactured peace of the country club. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest, staring up at the vaulted ceiling. I possessed the physical evidence of the forgery. I possessed the audio recording of the blackmail. I possessed the audio recording of the corrupt therapist. And now, thanks to their own greed, I possessed the digital keys to the vault. The syndicate was operating on borrowed time. Every property they owned, every credit line they utilized, every luxury they flaunted relied on the stability of those commercial loans. If the bank initiated a margin call demanding immediate repayment of the principal balance, Midwest Prairie Holdings would instantly collapse. The ensuing financial vacuum would trigger a cascade of defaults across Richard's entire portfolio. But I could not simply call a customer service representative and report a forged signature. Low-level bank employees lack the clearance to freeze multi-million-dollar commercial accounts. To execute a comprehensive lockdown, I needed to bypass the branch-level bureaucracy and trigger an automated security protocol within the central banking mainframe. I needed to initiate a localized digital strike from a verified network. I turned my head, observing Diane. She was asleep, a soft, rhythmic breathing escaping her lips. Her designer handbag rested on the small table between our chairs. Inside that bag sat her smartphone. Diane bragged about managing the ledgers. That meant she held the primary banking applications on her device. She utilized the country club's secured wireless network, a network recognized by the bank servers as a trusted location. If I triggered the fraud alert using my own laptop from a hotel room, the bank algorithms might flag the request as a suspicious external hack, delaying the freeze for several days while they investigated. But if the alert originated from a trusted device connected to a verified network, the mainframe would act instantly. I glanced around the quiet lounge. The room was empty. The trickling water masked any ambient noise. I reached across the small table. My fingers brushed the smooth leather of her handbag. I unclasped the brass latch and slipped my hand inside, extracting her smartphone. The screen illuminated requesting a passcode. I did not hesitate. Narcissists are rarely creative with their security. They favor dates that celebrate their own milestones. I typed the month and year of her upcoming 40th wedding anniversary, the gala she obsessively planned. The screen unlocked, granting me full access to her digital life. I found the commercial banking application nested in a folder labeled Finance. I tapped the icon. The application utilized biometric facial recognition, but also offered a manual login bypass. Because I had memorized the corporate tax identification numbers and the loan origination codes from my prior research, I bypassed her saved credentials. I navigated directly to the guarantor portal. I entered my own Social Security number and the specific loan identification numbers Richard had linked to my name. The dashboard loaded. The screen displayed a sprawling network of debt, millions of dollars leveraged against a stolen trust. I tapped the settings menu, accessing the security protocols. I found the option labeled Report Critical Fraud. The system prompted a warning. Initiating a critical fraud alert suspends all account activity, freezes linked credit lines, and triggers an immediate compliance review. This action cannot be reversed without an in-person administrative hearing. I did not pause. I tapped Confirm. The screen flashed a solid red banner. The word Locked appeared across every listed account. I closed the application, wiped the screen free of fingerprints, and slipped the device back into her handbag. I returned to my reclined position, closing my eyes and listening to the steady trickling of the indoor waterfall. Diane slept peacefully beside me, dreaming of her gala. She had no idea her empire was already dead. The financial oxygen was cut off. Now, I just had to wait for the weekend to watch them publicly suffocate. The temporary block I initiated on Diane's smartphone at the country club spa was merely a primer. It suspended her mobile application access and intercepted the necessary two-factor authentication tokens, routing them to my own device. But a mobile lockout is an annoyance, a minor technical glitch she would likely blame on a forgotten password or a poor wireless connection. To deliver a lethal operational strike, I needed a desktop terminal. I needed to interface directly with the central fraud division of the commercial lender. Government bureaucracy moves at a glacial pace. If I handed my evidence to the Internal Revenue Service or a county prosecutor, the investigation would languish in a pile of manila folders for months. An investigator would schedule interviews, file subpoenas, and navigate a labyrinth of red tape. Diane and Richard would use that delay to liquidate their domestic holdings and wire the capital into offshore, untouchable accounts. I did not have months. I required immediate, cascading ruin. The next morning, I called my supervisor at the agricultural insurance firm and requested a personal day. I drove away from the hotel, leaving Bradley to coordinate debris removal with his father. I did not go to a coffee shop or a private office. I walked into the downtown Des Moines Public Library. The building offered sterile anonymity. The air smelled of floor wax and aging paper. I selected a quiet study carrel tucked away in the back corner of the reference section. I pulled my laptop from my tote bag and connected to the public wireless network, utilizing a secure, encrypted tunnel. I opened the commercial banking portal. Using the guarantor identification numbers Richard fraudulently linked to my Social Security profile, combined with the intercepted authentication tokens from Diane, I bypassed the primary security gates. The screen rendered a digital map of the Lawson family empire. Richard built his reputation as a formidable property developer, but the dashboard laid his true financial standing bare. He operated on the illusion of ownership. His portfolio consisted of luxury apartment complexes, suburban storage facilities, and upscale retail spaces, including Jessica Failing Boutique. yet he held a fraction of the actual equity. His strategy relied on relentless leverage. He borrowed against one property to purchase the next, utilizing the stolen $2 million trust as the bedrock collateral to secure the lowest possible interest rates. He survived on cash flow. The incoming rent payments covered the outgoing debt service, leaving just enough margin to fund Diane Country Club lifestyle and Jessica designer wardrobe. It was a delicate high-wire act. If the cash flow stopped, the lenders would instantly seize the deeds. I navigated to the Administrative Security tab. I bypassed the standard customer service prompts and located the portal dedicated to reporting critical institutional breaches. The interface provided a secure Dropbox for uploading legal documentation. I retrieved the scorched envelope from my bag. Using a portable digital scanner I purchased earlier that morning, I captured a high-resolution image of the trust codicil. The burnt edges and the pristine forged signature of Diane Lawson translated perfectly onto the screen. I attached the image file to the fraud report. Next, I accessed my cloud server. I downloaded the audio packet I extracted from the smart home surveillance network. The recording of Bradley coldly extorting his father, holding the stolen inheritance hostage to clear a Vegas gambling debt. I attached the audio file, labeling it Exhibit B. Finally, I opened a blank text document. As an insurance adjuster, I possess extensive experience drafting ironclad liability reports. I typed out a formal affidavit of identity theft. I detailed the exact timeline of the forgery, the unauthorized transfer of funds into Midwest Prairie Holdings, and the fraudulent listing of my identity as a corporate guarantor on the commercial loans. I typed my full legal name at the bottom of the document, applying a certified digital signature. My signature carried the weight of a spotless professional record. I uploaded the affidavit, attaching it as the final piece of the payload. The bank algorithms require no human empathy. They do not care about country club memberships or anniversary galas. They respond exclusively to risk markers. When a legally recognized guarantor uploads verified proof of federal wire fraud and identity theft, the system does not wait for a manager to review the file. The software executes an automated preservation protocol. I moved my cursor over the red button labeled Initiate System Freeze. I took a slow, steady breath. The library remained quiet around me. A student typed on a keyboard 3 desks away. The distant hum of the ventilation system echoed in the ceiling. I clicked the button. The screen displayed a spinning loading wheel for 2 seconds. Then, a severe gray dialog box appeared. Critical security protocol enacted. The digital guillotine dropped. The software initiated an immediate margin call across Richard's entire commercial portfolio. Because the underlying collateral was flagged as an illicit, stolen asset, the bank automatically nullified the original loan terms. They demanded instant repayment of the principal balances. To prevent capital flight, the algorithm locked the primary holding accounts. It froze the corporate credit lines linked to the LLC. It suspended all scheduled outgoing wire transfers. The financial oxygen supply sustaining the Lawson family was severed in a fraction of a second. If Richard attempted to authorize a contractor payment, the transaction would generate an error code. If Jessica swiped her corporate card to purchase a coffee or a silk scarf, the register would decline the magnetic stripe. If Diane tried to issue a deposit for the country club catering staff, the check would bounce. The trap was permanently set. I closed the laptop, sliding it back into my leather bag. A cold, profound satisfaction settled over my chest. I did not feel guilt. I did not feel a lingering sense of familial loyalty. I felt the crisp, clean relief of a balanced ledger. I walked out of the library and stepped into the sharp Iowa morning air. The sunlight broke through the gray clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement. The syndicate was bankrupt. They just lacked the administrative notification confirming their ruin. Commercial banks rarely process catastrophic fraud alerts over the phone. They issue formal certified letters or wait for the client to contact a specialized mitigation department. With the weekend approaching, the banking executives would not reach Richard until Monday morning. The timing aligned perfectly with the social event of the season. I drove back to the hotel, navigating the midday traffic with a calm, unhurried precision. I keyed the lock and pushed the door open to our temporary suite. Bradley stood in the center of the room. A garment bag lay open on the bed, displaying his tailored tuxedo. He was frantically polishing a pair of leather dress shoes, his jaw clenched with nervous energy. The upcoming anniversary gala was not just a celebration for his parents. It was a crucial networking event. Richard invited his primary real estate investors to the dinner, intending to court them for a new suburban development project. Bradley viewed the evening as his audition for a senior partnership role. He needed the optics to be flawless. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice tight, projecting a manufactured authority. He set the shoe brush down and crossed his arms. "I was handling some insurance paperwork downtown," I replied, maintaining my serene, compliant facade. "There are a lot of forms to file for the fire claim." He let out a short, dismissive sigh. "You need to focus on Saturday night, Abigail. My father's top investors are flying in from Chicago. This is the most important night of my career. I need you to be presentable. I need you to play the part." I walked over to the closet, observing his frantic, shallow posture. He was a parasite, demanding a performance, unaware that his host was already dead. "I laid out the navy dress Mom bought for you," he continued, pointing a finger toward the armchair. "You will wear that. Keep your makeup simple, smile when spoken to, and do not bring up the house fire. It ruins the mood. People want to associate with success, not disaster. We need to project stability." I looked at the $4,000 navy sheath dress draped over the chair, a garment purchased with my stolen legacy, a uniform designed to signal my submission to his mother. I reached out and smoothed the expensive fabric. The silk felt cold against my fingertips. "You do not have to worry about me, Bradley," I said, turning my head to meet his anxious gaze. My voice was smooth, mirroring the icy calm of the frozen bank accounts. "I will wear the dress. I will smile at the investors. I promise to deliver a performance this family will never forget." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He turned back to his dress shoes, believing his instructions were received and respected. The architect of my extortion thought he controlled the narrative. He had no idea the stage was already rigged for a public execution. The days leading up to the 40th anniversary dinner felt like a masterclass in grotesque suburban pageantry. My physical home sat in ruins a few miles away, an empty, charred husk exposed to the October wind. Yet within the Lawson family orbit, the fire ceased to exist. It was an inconvenient blemish, swiftly erased from their collective memory. Diane spent the entire week holding court in the country club dining room, agonizing over the precise shade of the floral centerpieces and the brand of imported gin for the open bar. Jessica practically lived at the salon, demanding emergency skin treatments to ensure she looked flawless for the local photographers. They curated their reality with a terrifying single-minded focus. Their ability to compartmentalize disaster was a survival mechanism. Richard built his portfolio by ignoring structural rot and slapping fresh paint over cracking foundations. Diane managed her household the exact same way. If a problem could not be styled or bullied into submission, she simply pretended it was invisible. She treated my ruined kitchen as a minor scheduling conflict rather than a devastating loss. Saturday afternoon arrived, bringing a tense, suffocating atmosphere to our temporary hotel suite. The digital clock on the bedside table read 4 in the afternoon. The gala commenced at 7. Bradley paced the length of the carpet, holding a glass of amber scotch. His anxiety radiated through the small room. Tonight was not merely a celebration of his parents' enduring marriage. It was a high-stakes audition. Richard had invited 3 prominent commercial real estate investors, flying them in from Chicago to pitch a sprawling new suburban development. Bradley needed a senior partnership role to sustain his secret gambling debts. He required the investors to view him as a stable, competent successor. I stood at the ironing board near the window, pressing his crisp, white tuxedo shirt. The hot iron hissed as it met the damp cotton. I guided the metal plate with surgical precision, creating a flawless, sharp crease down the sleeve. I performed the duty of the obedient wife, ensuring his armor looked impenetrable. Bradley stopped pacing and pointed a finger toward the armchair. "You are wearing the navy sheath dress Mom bought you," he instructed, his tone tight and commanding. "I do not want any arguments, Abigail. This evening requires a unified front." I set the iron down on its heel. "I will wear the dress, Bradley," I replied, keeping my voice a smooth, placid surface. "Good," he muttered, taking a swallow of scotch. "You need to smile. You need to mingle. If anyone asks about the house, you tell them the insurance company is handling everything perfectly, and we are excited to rebuild. Do not complain. Do not act like a victim. The men arriving tonight evaluate risk for a living. They distance themselves from liability. We project success and nothing else." I picked up the hot iron, resuming my meticulous work on his collar. "I understand the assignment," I said. "We project success." He let out a harsh breath, setting his empty glass on the dresser. He unbuttoned his casual shirt and walked toward the bathroom. "I am taking a shower," he announced over his shoulder. "Have the suit ready when I get out." The bathroom door clicked shut. Seconds later, the sound of running water echoed through the suite. The moment the shower started, my subservient posture vanished. The obedient wife evaporated, leaving only the forensic liquidator. I unplugged the iron and walked to the closet. I reached past his hanging garment bags and retrieved a slim, black leather briefcase. I placed the case flat on the mattress, unlocking the brass clasps. During my long, quiet hours at the public library, I did not just freeze the commercial accounts. I compiled the physical evidence required for a public execution. Digital locks are invisible. They cause confusion and silent panic. But printed paper is tangible. Paper can be handed to a stranger. Paper demands immediate, undeniable acknowledgement. I opened a cardboard shipping box resting beside the briefcase. Inside sat 20 professionally bound dossiers. The covers were a sleek matte black, projecting the sterile authority of a corporate boardroom presentation. I lifted the first dossier, flipping it open to verify the contents. Page 1 featured a high-resolution color scan of the Scorched Trust codicil. The terms of my grandmother legacy were highlighted in pale yellow, explicitly detailing the $2 million principal. Page 2 contained a magnified crop of the delivery receipt, focusing on the elegant swooping ink of Diane forged signature. Page 3 displayed the bank routing logs, proving the exact date and time the stolen capital transferred into Midwest Prairie Holdings. The final section was the most devastating. It held a verbatim typed transcript of the audio recording I extracted from the smart home surveillance network. The text documented every word of the late-night extortion. It captured Bradley coldly holding the physical evidence of his mother crime hostage to clear his six-figure Vegas marker. It captured Richard agreeing to the terms, trading my financial independence to protect his empire. I ran my hand over the crisp, heavy stock paper. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It laid out the motive, the mechanism, and the confession in stark chronological order. I stacked the 20 dossiers inside the leather briefcase, arranging them in 2 neat columns. The financial freeze had been active for 48 hours. By all logical metrics, Diane and Richard should have been pacing in a lawyer office instead of dressing for a party. But the American commercial banking system relies on an archaic schedule. The automated fraud lockdown initiated on a Thursday afternoon. The Internal Risk Management Division flagged the accounts by Friday morning. However, clearinghouses and merchant vendors do not process sweeping corporate decline notifications over the weekend. The Country Club catering department swiped Richard Platinum card days ago to authorize a pending hold. That initial hold went through before the guillotine dropped. The final settlement, the transaction that actually extracts the cash from the frozen account, would not trigger until the event concluded tonight. Diane was preparing to walk into a grand ballroom filled with 200 of the most influential citizens in Iowa. She planned to drink vintage champagne and accept the adulation of her peers. She operated under the intoxicating illusion of untouchable supremacy. She had no idea she was stepping onto a scaffold. She was unequivocally bankrupt. Every asset she claimed to own was currently locked behind a federal fraud wall. The shower water stopped running. The pipes shuddered as the valve closed. I lowered the lid of the black leather briefcase. I pushed the brass latches down. They secured with a sharp, satisfying click. I slid the case under the edge of the bed, hiding it beneath the cascading fabric of the duvet cover. I walked back to the armchair and picked up the navy dress. I slipped the silk over my shoulders, smoothing the material down my waist. It fit perfectly. Diane chose a garment that hugged my frame, ensuring I looked like a pristine, expensive accessory for her son. I walked to the mirror and applied a muted shade of lipstick. My reflection showed a calm, unreadable woman. Bradley emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a white towel, steam billowing out behind him. He glanced at me, checking his watch. "Good, you are ready," he noted, his tone brisk and approving. "The town car is waiting downstairs. We need to beat the traffic." I picked up my small evening clutch. I knelt down, pretending to adjust the strap of my heel, and seamlessly retrieved the heavy briefcase, pulling it up by the thick leather handle. Bradley stopped buttoning his dress shirt, his brow furrowed, staring at the object in my hand. "What is that?" he asked. "You are not bringing a briefcase to a gala. It looks ridiculous." I held his gaze, offering a serene, empty smile. "Richard asked me to print some localized zoning maps for the Chicago investors," I lied, my voice effortless and smooth. "He said it might help you close the pitch tonight." I thought I would be helpful. The anxiety in his posture vanished instantly, replaced by a smug, swelling pride. He loved the idea of his father relying on him to impress the out-of-state capital. He loved the idea of his subservient wife playing the role of a dutiful assistant. "Perfect," he said, turning back to the mirror to fix his collar. "Just leave it under the table during dinner. I will hand them out when the time is right." I tightened my grip on the leather handle, feeling the dense weight of the 20 dossiers inside. "I will make sure the right people get them," I replied. We walked out of the hotel suite together, stepping into the elevator. The descent to the lobby felt swift and silent. A black luxury sedan idled at the curb, its engine purring in the cool evening air. The driver opened the rear door. I slid across the leather seat, placing the instrument of their total destruction on my lap. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, heading east toward the country club. The curtains were about to rise, and the audience was arriving. The black luxury sedan idled at the grand entrance of the country club. A valet in a tailored uniform opened my door, offering a white-gloved hand. I ignored it, stepping onto the red carpet and gripping the handle of the leather briefcase. Bradley emerged from the opposite side, adjusting his cuffs and plastering a confident, manufactured smile across his face. We walked through the arched double doors and stepped into a ballroom, dripping with obscene, stolen luxury. The visual assault of their artificial wealth was staggering. 3 towering ice sculptures carved into the shapes of soaring swans rested in silver basins melting slowly under the heat of the overhead spotlights. Crystal chandeliers refracted a warm, golden glow across the room, illuminating 200 of the wealthiest citizens in Des Moines. A live string quartet occupied a raised platform in the corner, playing a polite, sweeping waltz over the low hum of affluent conversation. Waiters navigated the crowded floor, carrying trays of seared scallops and vintage champagne. Everything in the room smelled of roasted truffle, heavy, expensive perfume, and unchecked hubris. A hostess directed us to the head table, positioned at the very front of the ballroom, directly facing the central stage. I took my designated seat, smoothing the silk of my navy dress. I placed the black briefcase on the thick carpet, resting it flush against my left ankle, hidden beneath the floor-length tablecloth. Bradley sat to my right. He was already sweating. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his forehead, reflecting the chandelier light. He dabbed his neck with a linen napkin, his eyes darting frantically toward the neighboring table. Richard sat adjacent to us, holding court with the 3 investors flown in from Chicago. The lead investor, an imposing silver-haired man named Harrison Cole, managed a sprawling portfolio of pension funds. Harrison was a ruthless pragmatist, known for analyzing risk and distancing himself from any trace of liability. Richard needed Harrison capital to break ground on a new suburban retail district. Without that out-of-state money, the Lawson empire would suffocate under its own localized debt. Bradley needed the deal to close to secure his partnership and cover his secret gambling markers. The tension radiating from my husband was palpable. He kept leaning over, offering hollow jokes and refilling Harrison's wine glass, acting the part of the eager, reliable heir. Across the room, Jessica floated between tables, wearing a custom silk gown she charged to the corporate account. She laughed loudly, tossing her head back and flashing a diamond bracelet. She paraded her unearned status, oblivious to the reality that her credit cards were currently dead plastic, holding zero purchasing power. Dinner service commenced. A procession of courses arrived and vanished. Lobster bisque, filet mignon, asparagus pureed with imported butter. I ate nothing. I kept my hands folded in my lap, sipping a single glass of iced water. I watched the digital clock on the far wall above the kitchen doors. 8:15, 8:45, 8:55. The low hum of conversation grew louder as the wine flowed freely. The atmosphere thickened with the intoxication of assumed success. At 9 o'clock sharp, Diane stood up from her chair. She wore a custom emerald green gown that swept the floor, her neck adorned with a heavy pearl necklace. She picked up a silver dessert spoon and tapped it against the rim of her champagne flute. The sharp, clear ringing sliced through the chatter. The string quartet lowered their bows, letting the music fade into a respectful silence. The guests turned their chairs facing the front of the room. Diane glided toward the small, carpeted stage, ascending the 3 steps with a practiced, regal grace. She stepped behind the wooden podium and adjusted the microphone stand. She offered a wide, radiant smile, sweeping her gaze across the seated crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Diane began, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "Looking out at this room, I see colleagues, friends, and partners who have stood by our side for decades. 40 years ago, Richard and I started with nothing but a shared vision. We built our lives from the ground up, brick by brick, relying on mutual trust and an unwavering commitment to our values." The audience offered polite, adoring applause. The mayor of Des Moines, sitting in the front row, nodded in solemn agreement. "It is easy to focus on the achievements," Diane continued, her tone shifting into a sickeningly sweet register. "It is easy to look at the buildings and the businesses. But true success requires discipline. It requires unyielding family loyalty. We endure late nights and difficult decisions because we understand the sacrifices we must make for our children. We secure their future so they can inherit a legacy built on integrity." The hypocrisy was suffocating. She stood on a stage funded by theft, wearing jewelry purchased with laundered capital, delivering a monologue about integrity. She utilized the vocabulary of a devoted matriarch to mask the actions of an extortionist. "Let us raise a glass," Diane concluded, lifting her crystal flute toward the chandeliers, "to 40 years of partnership, to the foundation we built and the future we continue to protect." The crowd murmured in agreement, raising their various beverages. The mayor lifted his glass. The club president lifted his glass. Harrison Cole offered a brief, polite nod, raising a tumbler of scotch. I did not raise a glass. I reached down beneath the tablecloth and wrapped my fingers around the thick leather handle of the briefcase. I pulled it up, letting it rest on my lap. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped softly against the carpet. I stood up. Bradley flinched, spilling a drop of wine onto his tuxedo shirt. He grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin. "Abby, sit down," he hissed, a frantic, panicked whisper. "What are you doing? The toast is not over." I looked down at his sweating, desperate face. I unclasped his fingers, peeling his hand away from my arm. I did not say a word to him. I turned and walked toward the stage. I did not scream. I did not run. I moved with the slow, deliberate precision of a forensic auditor entering a condemned building. The room remained focused on Diane, whose glass was still raised in the air. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps, the leather briefcase heavy in my right hand. Diane spotted me out of her peripheral vision. Her smile faltered, turning brittle at the edges. She lowered her flute, confusion warring with her instinct to maintain the pristine social facade. "Abigail," she whispered, leaning away from the microphone, "return to your seat." I bypassed her entirely. I stepped up to the edge of the stage, directly above the front row of tables. I rested the black leather briefcase on the surface of the podium, pushing Diane's champagne flute aside. I snapped the brass latches open. The sharp, metallic clicks echoed through the quiet room. I reached inside and retrieved 3 of the matte black printed dossiers. I stepped down from the podium, walking straight to the table occupied by the city officials and the primary investors. I handed the first crisp printed packet to the mayor of Des Moines. I handed the second dossier to the country club president. I turned to Harrison Cole, the man holding the financial keys to Richard Future. I placed the third dossier directly onto his china plate, covering his half-eaten dessert. A revised corporate prospectus, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying a lethal weight. I turned my back on the investors and walked back up the 3 carpeted steps. Diane stood frozen, her eyes darting between the black folders and my face. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat produced no sound. The panic finally breached her features. I stepped behind the podium and gripped the cold metal shaft of the microphone stand, pulling it down to match my height. I looked out at the sea of tailored suits and evening gowns. 200 faces stared back, waiting for the punchline of a joke they did not yet understand. My mother-in-law is right about sacrifice, I said. My voice, amplified by the sound system, rolled across the ballroom, steady and cold as winter ice. It lacked any trace of anger or hysteria. It was the voice of a judge reading a final verdict. She understands exactly what it takes to secure a legacy. I continued my gaze, sweeping the silent room. For 10 years, she sacrificed my $2 million inheritance to fund this exact party. The cellist on the raised platform dropped his bow. It struck the wooden floorboards with a sharp, discordant clatter. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The music died, plunging the ballroom into a breathless, suffocating vacuum. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a physical weight pressing against the eardrums of every guest. 200 people stopped breathing simultaneously. Diane's features twisted, shifting rapidly from shock to a deep, mottled crimson. The pristine emerald green gown suddenly looked garish against the pallor of her panic. She lunged toward the podium, her manicured hands grasping for the metal shaft of the microphone stand. "Security!" she shrieked, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch. "Get her off this stage! She is a deranged, ungrateful liar! She is having a psychotic episode!" I did not fight her for the microphone. I simply leaned closer to the active receiver, my lips brushing the wire mesh, ensuring my voice overpowered her frantic screaming. "Turn to page 2, I instructed. The command carried the sterile authority of a boardroom directive. In the front row, the mayor, the club president, and Harrison Cole simultaneously flipped open the matte black dossiers. The thick, high-stock paper turned with a heavy, synchronized rustle. "On page 2, you will see a certified trust codicil drafted 10 years ago," I stated, enunciating every syllable. "The principal amount is $2 million. Below the disbursement clause, you will see a high-resolution scan of a delivery receipt bearing Diane Lawson forged signature. A document recovered by the municipal fire department from behind a concealed wall cavity in my home last Tuesday." Harrison Cole adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses. He stared at the glossy printout, his eyes tracking the forged signature. Men who manage pension funds do not ignore physical evidence. A psychotic episode produces shouting and tears. It does not produce bound dossiers containing federal mail fraud receipts. "This is a fabrication," Diane screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the front row. "She manufactured those papers to ruin our family. Richard, do something." Richard sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of gray terror. He did not move to defend his wife. He was looking at Harrison Cole, recognizing the exact moment a multi-million-dollar development deal evaporated. I turned the page in my own master dossier resting on the podium. "Turn to page 4, I directed the room. The investors complied. The rustling of paper echoed again, slicing through Diane's protests. "On page 4, you will find the commercial loan origination forms for Midwest Prairie Holdings 1 explained. The documents reveal that Richard Lawson utilized my stolen inheritance as the primary collateral to secure his current properties. He then fraudulently listed my identity as a corporate guarantor to bypass the underwriting restrictions. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a calculated beat. I locked eyes with Harrison Cole. The silver-haired investor was no longer looking at the papers. He was staring at Richard with a cold, clinical disgust. If you review the margin ledgers, I continued, you will see that Richard recently diverted your private investment capital to cover the debt service on those illicit loans. He used your money to float a stolen trust. Harrison Cole snapped his dossier shut. The sound was sharp, like a pistol shot. He placed both hands flat on the linen tablecloth, his posture rigid and unyielding. They were looking at systemic federal wire fraud. They were looking at a syndicate that laundered their clean money through a stolen inheritance. Investors can forgive a poor market projection or a delayed construction schedule. They never forgive embezzlement. Richard finally reacted. He shoved his chair backward, the wooden legs grinding against the carpet. He stood up, his breathing shallow and rapid. He reached into his tuxedo jacket, pulling out his smartphone. His fingers fumbled against the touchscreen, frantically dialing his private banker, attempting to verify the status of his accounts. He was hoping I was bluffing. He was hoping the digital architecture of his empire remained intact. I turned back to the microphone, and on page 6, I said, projecting my voice across the ballroom to reach the table where my husband sat. Bradley was slumped in his chair, his complexion sickly pale. The glass of scotch trembled in his right hand. On page 6 is the typed transcript of a recorded audio file I stated staring dead into Bradley's terrified eyes. It documents a late-night conversation where my husband confesses to hiding the physical evidence of his mother crime inside our wall. He holds the forged receipt hostage, successfully extorting his father to erase a $150,000 illicit gambling debt. The crowd gasped. The sound rolled across the room, a collective intake of breath fueled by morbid high society fascination. The scandal had escalated from white-collar corporate fraud to localized familial extortion. He sold his silence, I announced, finalizing the audit. He monetized my existence to fund a casino marker. Diane stumbled backward, grabbing the edge of the podium to steady herself. Her mouth opened and closed, producing no sound. She scanned the ballroom, searching the faces of her peers for a sympathetic glance, a trace of the deference she commanded for 4 decades. She found nothing. The audience offered only cold, calculating distance. The society women who drank her wine and complimented her floral arrangements were already mentally rewriting their social calendars, erasing the Lawson name from future invitations. Richard pressed his phone against his ear, his face contorting into a mask of pure panic. "Pick up," he muttered, pacing near the edge of the dance floor. "Why is it going straight to an automated prompt? Pick up the line." Before Diane could recover her breath to signal the security guards standing near the exits, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung wide open. The country club general manager strode rapidly down the center aisle. He wore a tuxedo, but his usual polished demeanor was entirely absent. He carried a leather check presenter in his left hand. He bypassed the confused waiters and walked directly up to the head table, stopping inches away from Richard. The manager leaned forward. He attempted to keep his voice low out of professional habit, but the dead silent acoustics of the room carried every syllable to the surrounding tables. Mr. Lawson, the manager, whispered, his tone tight and urgent. "We have a severe administrative issue." Richard lowered his phone, glaring at the employee. "Not now," he snapped. "Can you not see we are dealing with a disruption? Send the security team to the stage immediately." The manager did not signal security. He stood his ground, holding out the leather check presenter. "Sir, your platinum card for the catering and the open bar just declined," the manager stated, refusing to break eye contact. A murmur ripped through the front rows. The guests leaned forward, whispering behind their hands. The financial reality was breaching the social perimeter. "Run it again," Richard hissed, a vein throbbing in his temple. "It is a fraud alert glitch. Try the secondary corporate account linked to the LLC. I already did, the manager replied, his voice hardening, dropping the polite, deferential facade. I ran every card on your primary file. The terminal is returning a master denial code. It is displaying a catastrophic bank-level fraud freeze across your entire portfolio. Your accounts are locked, sir. I cannot authorize the service for this evening. I require an alternate form of immediate payment. The illusion shattered. The pristine facade of the 40th anniversary gala, the bespoke emerald gown, the crystal chandeliers, the soaring ice sculptures, all of it instantly vaporized, revealing the hollow, bankrupt reality beneath. Richard was not a towering real estate mogul. He was a man standing in a rented ballroom, unable to buy a glass of cheap wine. Diane stood at the podium listening to the exchange. The realization hit her physical form. Her legs gave out. She dropped the crystal flute she had carried onto the stage. It hit the hardwood floorboards, shattering into a dozen sharp, glittering pieces. The sound of the breaking glass severed the tension in the room. Harrison Cole stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his cuffs with cold, mechanical precision. He did not look at Richard. He did not look at Diane. He turned to the two junior investors sitting beside him. "We are leaving," Harrison ordered. "Have the legal team draft an emergency injunction against Midwest Prairie Holdings first thing Monday morning. I want our capital clawed back before the federal regulators freeze the remaining physical assets." Harrison turned and walked down the center aisle, his posture projecting absolute ruthless detachment. The junior investors followed him without a word. Their departure served as the starting gun. The dam broke. The 200 wealthy guests, sensing the radioactive exposure of a massive tax evasion scandal and a federal fraud investigation, began a rapid, synchronized exodus. Chairs scraped against the carpet as politicians, bankers, and socialites abandoned their half-eaten dinners. They moved swiftly toward the mahogany doors, prioritizing their own reputations over their loyalty to a bankrupt host. Nobody offered Diane a comforting word. Nobody stopped to shake Richard's hand. They fled the ballroom, leaving the Lawson family to burn in the center of their ruined gala. Panic, raw and unfiltered, consumed the Lawson family. The grand ballroom transformed into an evacuation zone. 200 affluent guests moved with a synchronized, urgent desperation. They did not run, because high society dictates maintaining a veneer of dignity even during a retreat, but their pace was undeniably frantic. They gathered their expensive coats, avoiding eye contact with the head table at all costs. The scrape of wooden chair legs against the thick carpet created a dull, chaotic symphony. Waiters stood frozen near the kitchen swinging doors, holding silver trays of untouched food, unsure of their orders as the elite crowd surged toward the exits. The soaring swan ice sculptures continued to melt, dripping tepid water into their silver basins, adding a hollow, rhythmic splashing to the clearing room. The string quartet packed their cellos and violins into velvet-lined cases and slipped out a side door without requesting their payment. The room emptied at a staggering speed, leaving the syndicate stranded in a vast cavern of their own making. A few lingering figures remained near the front row. They were not friends offering comfort to a grieving family. They were creditors calculating their immediate financial exposure. Two local commercial developers who had partnered with Richard on a downtown retail space cornered him near the abandoned dessert cart. "You used our capital to float a stolen trust," one developer stated, his voice low and dangerous. "You lied on the underwriting agreements, Richard. We are calling our corporate lawyers right now. We will file a federal injunction before midnight. You are going to face a grand jury for this level of systemic wire fraud." Richard raised his hands, palms facing outward, attempting a placating gesture that lacked any real authority. "Let us be rational," he pleaded, his tailored tuxedo suddenly looking 2 sizes too large for his shrinking frame. "It is an administrative error, a localized misunderstanding regarding the holding company architecture. I can clear the ledger by Monday morning. I just need time to move some liquid assets." The developer sneered, stepping closer to the broken patriarch. "You do not have a ledger, Richard. You have a crime scene. We are calling the state attorney general." The men turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing alone near the velvet drapes. The imposing real estate mogul dissolved into a hollow, terrified old man facing the imminent reality of a federal indictment and the loss of his freedom. Across the room, a sharp, piercing sob cut through the lingering murmurs. Jessica stood near her assigned table, clutching her smartphone with both hands. The screen illuminated her face, highlighting the streaks of dark mascara running down her cheeks. Her custom silk gown dragged against the floor as she stumbled toward her mother. "My cards are declining," Jessica wailed, holding the phone out like a piece of damning evidence. "The boutique account is locked. The vendor in Paris just emailed me canceling the seasonal inventory shipment. They say the wire transfer bounced due to a central security hold." "What did you do, Mom? Tell me, what is happening?" Diane remained anchored to the wooden podium, staring blankly at the shattered crystal champagne flute scattered near her heels. She offered no maternal comfort to her daughter. Her psychological architecture was enduring a catastrophic system failure. The foundation of her identity relied entirely on projecting superiority and flawless control. Stripped of her wealth and her social standing, she possessed nothing. She was an empty vessel. "Tell them to fix it," Jessica demanded, her voice rising to a frantic shriek echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Call the bank, Diane. Call them right now and unlock my store. I have car payments due tomorrow. I cannot lose my lease." Diane closed her eyes, slowly shaking her head. The silence that followed was a definitive admission of total defeat. Jessica collapsed into a nearby dining chair, burying her face in her hands, crying over the sudden death of her unearned status and her impending bankruptcy. I watched the family fracture, observing the scene from the elevated stage. I felt no pity. A structural collapse is an inevitable consequence of building a life on a corrupt foundation. Heavy footsteps pounded against the carpeted stairs leading up to the podium. Bradley rushed the stage, his breathing ragged and uneven. He stumbled on the top step, falling forward onto his knees. The crisp white tuxedo shirt I meticulously ironed hours earlier was stained with sweat and a drop of spilled red wine. He reached out, grabbing my left wrist. His fingers were clammy, trembling with a desperate, terrified energy. "Abby, please," he begged, looking up at me from the floor. His eyes were wide, swimming with unshed tears. He abandoned all pride, discarding the confident heir persona to reveal the pathetic, terrified extortionist hiding underneath. "Listen to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the strain of his panic. "I only hid the letter to protect you. My dad is a ruthless man, Abby. If I confronted him directly about the forgery, he would have destroyed both of us. He would have ruined our lives. I kept the secret to keep our marriage safe. I was waiting for the right time to tell you. I did it for us. I promise." The sheer audacity of his lie was insulting. He expected me to forget the audio recording. He expected me to believe he leveraged my stolen inheritance to clear his Vegas gambling debts out of a profound sense of marital devotion. He assumed he could still manipulate my perception, utilizing the same gaslighting tactics that worked for a decade. He thought a display of tears could erase a paper trail. I looked down at the man who monetized my existence. I studied the face of the husband who sat across from me at the breakfast table, knowing my financial independence was buried inside the wall behind my oven. I did not yell. I did not justify my actions or debate his fabricated timeline. Arguing with a parasite only validates their delusion. I calmly unclasped his fingers, peeling his sweaty hand away from my wrist. I stepped back, creating a deliberate physical boundary between his kneeling form and my posture. I reached into the side pocket of my black leather briefcase. My fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope I prepared earlier that week. I pulled it out, holding the heavy parchment in the air for a brief second, ensuring he saw the legal seal stamped on the front. I dropped the envelope onto his chest. It hit his tuxedo shirt with a dull, definitive thud before sliding into his lap. "What is this?" Bradley stammered, looking down at the thick stack of papers. "Heavily expedited divorce filings," I stated. My voice echoed through the empty ballroom, devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "My attorneys filed the initial paperwork yesterday morning. You will find the asset division proposals inside. Given your documented extortion and your direct complicity in federal wire fraud, my legal team anticipates a swift and uncontested settlement." Radley stared at the envelope, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Abby, you cannot do this. We are a team. We can fix the accounts. We can hire lawyers and rebuild. Please do not leave me here." I looked down at him, offering a cold, empty stare. "I am an auditor, Bradley," I said, delivering the final assessment. "I do not offer forgiveness. I balance the ledgers." I turned my back on him. I closed the brass latches of my briefcase, gripping the thick leather handle. I walked down the carpeted steps, leaving him kneeling on the stage, clutching the legal dissolution of our marriage. I navigated the empty tables, bypassing the abandoned dinners and the melting ice sculptures. Diane remained frozen near the podium, staring at the wall. Richard stood near the exit, a broken man, waiting for the authorities to arrive. Jessica continued to weep over her dead credit cards. The syndicate was weeping. Their empire was liquidated. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open, leaving the stifling, ruined gala behind me. I walked through the quiet country club lobby and stepped outside. The crisp, clean Iowa night air hit my face, clearing the scent of truffle and expensive perfume from my lungs. I inhaled deeply. The sky above was dark and clear, the stars visible over the manicured hedges. I walked toward the waiting town car, ready to return to the city. The trap was executed. The debts were paid. 6 months later, the Iowa landscape shed the bitter winter frost, giving way to a crisp, sharp spring morning. The air felt uncommonly clean, carrying the scent of thawing earth and new growth. The transition in the seasons mirrored the sweeping systemic changes in my own reality. The financial guillotine I dropped on the night of the country club gala did not lift. The Central Fraud Division of the commercial bank moved with a ruthless, algorithmic efficiency. They forwarded my printed dossiers and the intercepted audio files directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Arrest warrants materialized within days. Richard and Diane faced a sprawling grand jury indictment detailing wire fraud, identity theft, and extensive tax evasion. The commercial lenders initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings on the strip malls and the luxury apartment complexes, liquidating the portfolio to cover the delinquent loan margins. The empire dissolved into a chaotic mess of bankruptcy filings and frozen assets. However, the fate of Midwest Prairie Holdings followed a different legal trajectory. Forensic accounting provided an undeniable paper trail, proving the shell company was seeded exclusively by the forged $2 million trust codicil. My legal team filed a swift civil asset forfeiture petition. We argued that the holding company and all its subsidiary properties were fruits of a poisoned tree. The federal judge agreed. Recognizing the sheer scale of the embezzlement, the court bypassed a lengthy probate dispute. They placed the entity under a constructive trust and transferred full executive ownership directly to me. I did not just recover my stolen inheritance, I absorbed the corporation. I became the sole proprietor of their remaining localized assets. Before visiting the properties, I reviewed the status of the secondary syndicate members. Jessica lost her high-end boutique lease within 72 hours of the anniversary dinner. Stripped of her unlimited corporate cards and her subsidized retail space, she filed for personal bankruptcy. She quietly relocated to a cramped apartment across town, securing a minimum wage retail job to appease her creditors. Radley fared far worse. The divorce proceedings finalized with a swift, brutal efficiency. Lacking his father's financial umbrella, Bradley faced his Vegas lenders without a safety net. He currently resided in a cheap roadside motel, attempting to negotiate payment plans he possessed no capacity to honor. He traded a luxury hotel suite for a cinder block room overlooking a noisy interstate highway. The ledgers concerning the siblings were settled. Only the architects remained. I drove my sedan up the winding, tree-lined driveway of the primary Lawson estate. The sprawling limestone mansion used to project an intimidating generational wealth designed to make visitors feel small and inadequate. Today, the property looked hollow, stripped of its intimidating aura. A battered, rented moving truck sat idling on the manicured front lawn, its heavy tires crushing the pristine green grass Diane used to obsess over. I parked my car and stepped onto the paved driveway. The morning air carried a biting chill, requiring me to pull my wool coat tighter around my shoulders. I held a clipboard in my right hand and a heavy ring of brass master keys in my left. The county sheriff, a tall, stoic man wearing a brown uniform, stood waiting near the front stone steps. Diane and Richard stood on the wide, wraparound porch. The transformation in their physical appearance was staggering. The bespoke emerald gowns and tailored tuxedos were gone, replaced by faded denim and generic, unbranded cotton sweaters. Richard looked a decade older, his shoulders slumped, his posture defeated. His face was heavily lined, carrying the dark, heavy stress of impending federal trials and the loss of his reputation. He avoided looking in my direction, keeping his eyes fixed on the gravel driveway. Diane clutched a standard brown cardboard box against her chest, her knuckles stark white from the strain. She stared at me, her eyes hollow and vacant. The thick makeup and the towering hairstyle she utilized to command the country club dining room were absent. She lacked the energy to summon her usual haughty disdain. The psychological architecture she relied on to subjugate her family had collapsed, leaving a terrified, empty shell. I walked up the stone steps, stopping beside the sheriff. I did not offer a dramatic monologue. I did not gloat or demand a belated apology. Emotional theater is a tool for victims seeking external validation. I was an auditor, finalizing a transaction. I unclipped the formal eviction notice from my board and handed it to the uniformed officer. The sheriff stepped forward, presenting the crisp legal document to Richard. The property title transfer is finalized. Mr. Lawson, the sheriff stated, his voice firm and deeply bureaucratic, you are required to vacate the premises immediately. Any remaining possessions inside the structure are now the legal property of the new owner. Richard took the paper, his hands trembling slightly. He swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing above his collar. He did not say a word. He turned and guided his wife down the steps toward the waiting moving truck. Diane walked with a slow, shuffling gait, resembling a woman navigating a dark, unfamiliar room. She paused near the rear bumper of the truck, clutching her cardboard box. She cast one final, desperate glance toward the limestone mansion she used to rule. I met her gaze, offering a flat, unreadable expression. I gave her no friction, no anger, and no pity. She broke eye contact first, climbing into the passenger seat and shutting the metal door. The heavy diesel engine sputtered, coughing a cloud of dark exhaust into the crisp air. The truck rolled down the winding driveway, carrying the architects of my extortion out of my life forever. I turned and locked the heavy oak doors of the mansion, securing my new high-yield asset. But my work required one final physical adjustment. I drove back to the suburbs, navigating the familiar streets until I reached the gutted house where the grease fire started. The property belonged to Midwest Prairie Holdings, which meant I now held the deed, free and clear. I walked through the back door, stepping into the ruined kitchen. The smell of cold, wet ash lingered in the exposed floorboards. The ruptured wall cavity where the envelope had been wedged stood open to the room, resembling a dark, festering wound. I did not hire contractors to patch the drywall or restore the cabinets. I hired a specialized structural demolition crew. I stood on the back patio, drinking a cup of hot black coffee, and watched three men in hard hats swing heavy steel tools into the framing. They bypassed the drywall and targeted the custom oak load-bearing beam Diane proudly called a wedding gift. The wood splintered and cracked, groaning under the relentless force of the sledgehammers. The structural supports snapped. The heavy oak beam crashed to the floor, raising a thick, choking cloud of gray dust into the morning sun. The crew continued their work, tearing the entire kitchen down to the foundation dirt, pulling up the floorboards and severing the plumbing lines. I watched the destruction with a profound, serene clarity. I erased Diane's pristine design, eradicating the physical manifestation of her control. She built a tomb designed to hold me captive and demand my gratitude. I reduced her tomb to splinters. I planned to pour a new foundation building, a structure based entirely on my own specifications. The syndicate tried to bury my future inside a dark, hidden wall, utilizing my own legacy to fund their arrogance. They failed to realize that buried seeds eventually breached the surface, cracking the concrete above them. I stood in the clean Iowa air, listening to the sound of the wreckage being cleared away. The truth emerged. The criminals were exiled, and the accounts were consolidated. The debts were paid in full. The ledger was flawlessly, permanently balanced. There is a distinct, lingering quiet that settles over a demolished room. When the dust clears and the structural beams are stripped away, you are left looking at the bare dirt foundation. Standing in the wreckage of the kitchen my in-laws used to cage me, I found myself reflecting not on the stolen money or the shattered gala, but on the profound generational tragedy of the Lawson family. Their ruin was not a sudden accident. It was the slow, inevitable harvest of a toxic architecture. It was the direct result of a fundamental, catastrophic failure in parenting. In modern American culture, we often confuse financial provision with genuine family responsibility. We live in a society that measures a traditional family structure by the crispness of its manicured lawn, the prestige of its country club membership, and the zip code of its real estate. Richard and Diane operated under the delusion that buying a house, paying for a luxury car, or hosting a lavish wedding equated to successful parenting. They believed wealth was a substitute for morality. But a checkbook is not a moral compass. True long-term guidance requires a foundation built on honesty, fairness, and an unwavering commitment to emotional awareness. Diane and Richard provided their children with an abundance of capital, but starved them of integrity. They modeled a worldview where people were merely assets to be managed, and secrets were currency to be traded. When we examine the psychological wreckage of their two children, the consequences of this environment become painfully clear. Look at Jessica. Raised in a household that valued appearance over substance, she became a hollow vessel. She was handed a high-end retail boutique not to foster her independence or teach her the value of hard work, but to serve as a convenient tax shelter for her father's illicit empire. She was never taught how to balance a ledger, how to endure a setback, or how to build a life of her own. Her parents shielded her from every consequence, leaving her entirely defenseless when the illusion finally shattered. Raising a child without demanding accountability is not an act of love. It is an act of sabotage. Then we must evaluate Bradley. The tragedy of my former husband is the starkest warning regarding the failure of emotional awareness in parenting. Richard demanded unquestioning loyalty and projected an image of ruthless dominance. Diane utilized guilt and the psychological leash of ungratefulness to control her orbit. In an environment devoid of authentic connection or emotional safety, Bradley learned that survival required manipulation. He watched his mother forge a legal document stealing a $2 million inheritance from his wife. Instead of recognizing this as a profound betrayal, he recognized it as leverage. Bradley did not view his family as a sanctuary. He viewed them as a bank he could extort. When parents weaponize secrets and prioritize their social standing over the truth, they do not raise loyal children. They raise mercenaries. Bradley's willingness to hold his own mother federal crime hostage to clear a casino marker was the bitter, ultimate fruit of the Lawson parenting philosophy. He was the perfect reflection of the corrupt system that built him. A healthy traditional family structure is supposed to serve as a launch pad for the next generation. It is designed to be a safe harbor where children learn the mechanics of empathy, respect, and mutual trust. It is where we are supposed to learn that love is freely given, not transactionally earned. When parents introduce extortion conditional affection and gaslighting into the home, they poison the groundwater. They teach their children that love is a negotiation and trust is a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. Furthermore, this story illuminates the dangerous expectations placed upon those brought into a family through marriage. The American ideal of expanding the family tree often carries a dark, unspoken caveat. Outsiders are frequently expected to assimilate, quietly surrendering their boundaries and their independence out of a misplaced sense of gratitude. Diane expected me to shrink into myself to accept a $4,000 dress as compensation for my stolen autonomy. She expected me to thank her for the drywall that entombed my future. But genuine family responsibility requires treating a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law with the same baseline of fairness and honesty owed to anyone else. A true matriarch does not demand blind submission. She fosters unity through transparency. By treating my existence as an asset to be managed, Diane destroyed any possibility of authentic connection. She prioritized her ledger over my humanity, and in doing so, she initiated the very audit that dismantled her life. It takes a profound level of courage to stop accepting the narrative handed to you by the people who claim to have your best interests at heart. It takes strength to stop apologizing for asking questions, to stop feeling ungrateful for identifying the discrepancies in the story. We are conditioned to protect the family secret, to keep the peace at the holiday dinner table, to swallow our discomfort so the picture remains flawless. But peace maintained by silence is just a hostage situation in disguise. If you have ever sat across a dining room table looking at the polished faces of your relatives and realized they were guarding a vault of lies, you are not alone. If you have ever been called difficult, ungrateful, or paranoid simply because you refuse to accept a counterfeit reality, your experience is valid. This is exactly why we gather here at the Grape Echo Stories channel. We form a community for the individuals who refuse to be managed. We share these stories to remind each other that the truth operates like a physical force. It outlives the forgery, it outlasts the gaslighting, and it always leaves a paper trail. We explore the quiet, calculated ways people reclaim their power and rewrite their own histories, ensuring the ledgers are always balanced. I encourage you to hit the subscribe button and join us as we continue to document the pursuit of earned justice. As the dust settles on the Lawson estate and the moving trucks carry away the remnants of an artificial empire, we are left with a lingering, haunting reflection. We all inhabit structures built by the generations before us. We inherit their habits, their values, and sometimes their hidden debts. We walk through the halls of our own lives assuming the walls are solid, assuming the people who built them used honest materials. But a pristine coat of paint can hide a multitude of sins. The next time you sit in the quiet of your own home, listening to the familiar sounds of your family, look closely at the framework surrounding you. Examine the boundaries you have allowed others to draw around your life. Ask yourself what truly holds up your ceiling. Is it the sturdy, unyielding timber of honesty and mutual respect? Or is it a carefully sealed envelope waiting in the dark for a single spark to expose the rot within?